Okay, so yeah, I'm just gonna. This is just me coming in to let you all know what this is gonna be. This is gonna be a pretty much mic-less night stream, just because really late stream because I really don't have the fucking will. It's probably gonna be like maybe 2 hours, if that. It really depends on how long it'll probably take me to find these fucking wisps. I think I've accidentally looked at them maybe like 1 or 2 of them so far, so I'll probably I have a guide up. But yeah, if I sound like shit or sound just low energy, it's because I didn't have intention on streaming tonight. So I'm not really going to use my voice at all. I'll probably continue the story for the game. I'll probably continue the story for the game much tomorrow or something. If not Thursday. It really depends on bullshit. Anyway. I also want to go ahead and say that my intention for this, the reason why this is starting off later, way later than I intended, is because I was trying to figure out the audio stuff. So if I was debating on having like, I probably might actually. I'll probably just turn off in-game music and then have like spooky video or something playing on in the background that I'll put like in the bottom corner or something. So maybe I'll do that. Hold on. Because I've been like podcasting just spooky shit. Like true crime, like mysterious true crime stuff that doesn't focus in on like the people investigating. Anyway, so yeah, I'm gonna have like spooky videos on in the background while I just do this for a while. So, sit back, chillax, and enjoy the vibe. Mic's going off now. Ugh, things are not going as intended again, of course. Just give me a fucking minute. Computer's having connections too.
Today's video is sponsored by Hunter Killer. Well, the weather outside's getting frightful, and cold evenings call for cold cases. But rather than watching yet another true jetpacks. They're every kid's fantasy. Who didn't dream about soaring through the skies in one of these things, like our old pal Dexter? The one with the lab. But although jetpacks do indeed exist, they're still quite basic in what they can achieve, and we're a long way off from being able to fly safely alongside airplanes thousands of feet in the sky. Or are we? As you're about to hear, somebody may already be doing just that. On the 30th of August, 2020, the aircraft control tower of Los Angeles International Airport received a rather unusual radio transmission. It was from American Airlines Flight 1997, and the transcript of the message reads as follows. Tower, this is American 1997. We just passed a lone man flying off our left side, maybe 300 yards or so, about our altitude. The aircraft controller must have assumed he had misheard the pilot. But just minutes later, he received another transmission, this time from a Utah-based SkyWest pilot who confirmed the original report. Tower, I think we just saw the guy passing us. I think he's wearing a jetpack. A few months later, an LA Police Department helicopter crew spotted what appeared to be a balloon floating in the skies above Beverly Hills. On closer inspection, the balloon appeared to depict the Nightmare Before Christmas character, Jack Skellington. It had obviously escaped from a Halloween party at some point a month prior, and had been floating above Los Angeles ever since. Since rumours of a jetpack-wearing daredevil were well known amongst aviation circles, the helicopter crew believed they had just solved the mystery. Given the speed at which commercial jetliners travel, it was possible that all of the pilots just got a glance of this balloon and mistook it for a man wearing a jetpack. After all, the balloon's behaviour seemed remarkably similar to that of their mystery jetpacker, so the balloon and jetpack man were probably one and the same. With the mystery of the LA jetpacker believed to be solved, Californians simply went about their business. Yet it wasn't long before another reported jetpack sighting reignited people's faith in the improbable. On the 14th of October, the pilot of China Airlines Flight 006 reported seeing a flying object like a flight suit jetpack at around 6,000 feet. This encounter wasn't nearly as well publicized as the others, but when reached for comment, the pilot very firmly stated that this was not some errant party balloon, insisting that he was experienced enough to know the difference between a cartoon skeleton and an actual human being. Then, on the 21st of December, a flying instructor with the LA-based Sling Pilot Academy was making a routine flight near Palos Verdes and Catalina Island. When he reached around 3,000 feet, he spotted something on the horizon, prompting him to immediately switch on the plane's front-facing video camera. The footage he recorded was posted to the Academy's Instagram account, and apparently confirmed the existence of what some called the LA Iron Man. It appears to show a jetpack, the video's caption reads, but it could also be a drone or some other object. If it really is a guy in a jetpack, then it remains to be seen whether it's a legal test flight, or if it's related to the recent jetpack sightings near LAX. Slowly but surely, what was once a silly rumor was turning out to be very, very credible. Jetpack sightings dwindled around the turn of the new year, and Californians would have to wait until July of 2021 for their next sighting. But by that point, it seems not only had the existence of the Jetpack Man been confirmed, but he had become something of a normalized nuisance to the pilots of LAX. Because, on the 28th of July, a pilot reported seeing a flying object that looked a lot like a man flying a jetpack, hovering off the Californian coast at approximately 5,000 feet. One Boeing 747 pilot called into the radio control tower to report a, quote-unquote, possible jetpack man in sight. The control tower then relayed this information to the pilot of SkyWest Flight 326, asking him if he had seen the unidentified flying object. "We were looking," the pilot responded, "but we did not see Iron Man. I repeat, did not see Iron Man." The control tower then beamed a message out to every pilot in a 100-mile radius, telling them, "All aircraft, use caution for the jetpack. He's just north of the final, around 5,000 feet at Gate C." These sightings become all the more credible once we learn that humanity is already in possession of jetpack technology. However, there are only a handful of companies that actually make jetpacks. One of these companies is owned by former Swiss Air Force pilot Yves Rossi, but his particular prototype requires him to be hoisted in the air by a helicopter or balloon before he can take off. California-based company Jetpack Aviation has created 5 jetpacks that can be worn in a similar manner to backpacks. Yet, as chief executive David Mayman has insisted, none of them are for sale. David added that his company's jetpacks are technically capable of reaching heights of 15,000 feet, but due to fuel constraints, prototypes can only safely reach about 1,000 or 1,500 feet. In his words, to fly up to 6,000 feet from the ground, to fly around for long enough to be seen by China Airlines and then descend again, you'd be out of fuel. Honestly, it's more likely an electric drone, perhaps one with a mannequin attached. But a functional jetpack at those altitudes? I'd have to see it to believe it. Despite David's skepticism, Thomas Anthony, director of the USC Aviation Safety and Security Program, is considerably less skeptical. "We know for a fact that these things exist, and people in that community will know who has bought these packs," he said. "If someone is doing this, they're going to have to take off and land somewhere, and there's going to be noise. We'll find them eventually." Thomas also went on to say that he doubts the culprit is using an airport to take off, and advised investigators to search secluded industrial spots for clues, such as those around the industrial city of Vernon. Yet as much as the jetpack sightings have captured the public's imagination, Thomas Anthony insists that his interest is more than just recreational. You see, large civilian airliners are designed to withstand getting hit by small objects. But a big, metal object getting sucked into an engine? That's a considerably more dangerous prospect. As one aviation expert said, the engines aren't designed to consume something large and metal, or something with fuel that's going to burn or explode. That could be potentially catastrophic for an airplane. You could potentially have an engine explode and bring down the airliner, and potentially hundreds of people could die. Given the number of eccentric millionaires that call Los Angeles home, it doesn't seem entirely out of the question that a functional jetpack might fall into the hands of a wealthy adrenaline junkie. If you had the time, the money, and the courage, why not experiment with the cutting edge of aviation technology? Still, if there really is a person flying around alongside airplanes, it's not just his own life that he's putting at risk. If you happen to be soaring through LA's blue skies, I hope for your sake you don't encounter the Iron Man. And if you do, that he doesn't get sucked into your plane's engine, or he won't be the only one going out with a bang. With a population of just under 2 million, the North Vietnamese province of Tay Binh is one of the country's most unique and well-known regions. With its name meaning Great Peace, Tay Binh is essentially a distinct, cultural island, separated from its neighbours by the Great Red River Delta. Yet, Tay Binh is also the home of the Tran family, who, in 2002, fell victim to a mysterious and terrifying phenomenon. The Trans are essentially your average rural Vietnamese family, with 4 different generations all living under one roof. The head of the family, 65-year-old Tran Van Rang, was the father of 8 children, 2 of which had young families of their own. They made their living farming rice, and business was so good that the family were eventually able to construct a second house, right next to their original one. This was a huge point of pride for Tran Van Rang, who saw no greater purpose in life than to care for those who needed him. To the Trans, the future seemed bright. Yet no one could have foreseen the darkness that was about to befall them. According to Tran Quoc Viet, one of the family's eldest sons, the horror began when his younger brother commenced construction of the new family home. Just days after the work started, the family's cattle suddenly became ill. Not long after that, the remaining livestock seemed to collectively lose their minds. Pigs, ducks, chickens, they all went absolutely berserk. They fought amongst themselves and ran into solid concrete walls, as if they were terrified by some unseen presence among them. Some noted that the animals appeared to be foaming at the mouth, as if afflicted by rabies. Yet there was simply no way that the rabies virus could spread that quickly between animals that had been sequestered into separate paddocks. One by one, the creatures fell, and within just a matter of hours, all except for one of his younger brother's animals had collapsed and died. This one creature, a duck, seemed to be the only living thing immune to this mysterious plague. Within a few days, the same horrifying fate befell their parents' cattle too. It was nothing short of a complete catastrophe, as almost all of the family's wealth was tied up in their livestock. Yet these animal deaths were only the beginning. The family's eldest son, Tran Van Viet, was probably the most successful of the Tran siblings. He already owned a house of his own, had a 5-year-old son, and was described by all as a healthy young man in the prime of his life. But soon, Tran Van Viet began to suffer from mysterious pains, and after they failed to subside, he was admitted to hospital. Frustrated doctors performed test after test, but they simply couldn't determine what was wrong with him. After a while, Tran Van Viet found he was too weak to work, and soon began to display horrifyingly similar symptoms to those suffered by the livestock. Van began foaming at the mouth and suffering intense seizures, but still his doctors failed to offer a logical explanation. Tragically, Tran Van Viet would pass away in mid-2002, leaving his wife a widow and his child fatherless. His death hit the family hard, and when the same bizarre symptoms were spotted in Van's surviving relatives, the psychological effects were almost as devastating as the physical. Tran Van Rang was haunted by his son's death and began drinking heavily. Yet the more he drank, the more his health deteriorated. And barely a month after Van Viet's death, Van Rang would also fall victim to the same violent seizures that took his son. Now 2 of the Tran family had fallen victim to the same mysterious disease. 3 months after Van Rang's death, and in line with Vietnamese customs, 4 generations of the Tran family travelled out to the cemetery in which their former patriarch was buried, with the intention of performing a memorial ceremony. Among the congregation was Tran Van Ut, as well as Tran Van Ut's young son, who joined in mourning his deceased grandfather. Suddenly, the young boy collapsed, and right in front of his grandfather's grave, the child began to suffer the same heavy convulsions that killed Van Rang. He turned purple before frothing at the mouth, and within just a few minutes of the episode commencing, he was dead. In the days that followed, 3 additional members of the Tran family would be rushed to hospital. The Tran mother, Nguyen Tai Dao, passed away during this period, suffering the same horrific symptoms as her departed son and husband. Tran Van Ut soon joined his son in death, his grief rendering him physically incapable of fighting off whatever terrifying illness had gripped his entire family. Tran Van Ut's wife was completely and utterly heartbroken and moved away from Tai Bin in an attempt to escape her boundless grief. Yet, when she did, she noticed something curious. Her symptoms suddenly disappeared. By that point, word of the Tran family's 5 unexplained deaths had frightened and captivated the Vietnamese nation. Hundreds of medical professionals, police officers and scientists descended on the family's farm, all hoping to prevent any more unnecessary deaths. For 4 straight weeks, the Vietnamese investigation team would pore over the site of the farm in hopes of solving the deadly mystery. They took water samples, air samples, samples of the food the family had been eating. The team even captured a variety of local wildlife species, vivisecting them in hopes of uncovering the phantom disease. Not even the Tran family themselves were above suspicion, and on more than one occasion, Quoc Viet, the last surviving Tran son, noticed he was being followed by police officers in plain clothes. The plot thickened even further when Pham Thi Thong, Phan Rang's mother and the eldest member of the family, died after being rushed to hospital with the same symptoms as her relatives. During the course of her treatment, the nurses tending to her began suffering the same symptoms of the phantom disease. They complained of aches and pains in almost random places, and one nurse even passed out while on duty. In the end, the authorities' official explanation for the Tran family deaths was pesticide poisoning. Yet it should be noted that there was no trace of any deadly pesticides present in the bodies of the victims, nor on any of the land they owned. What's more, despite the official report blaming a pesticide for the deaths, it fails to name the exact substance which killed off the Tran family. So, with the official explanation for the family's sudden, mysterious, and no doubt painful deaths being viewed as absolute codswallop, many Vietnamese believe that their government is covering something up. This has led to a number of conspiracy theories. The more outlandish revolve around evil snake spirits and other dark presences that supposedly call Tai Bin home. The more grounded center around the idea that the Tran family were little more than guinea pigs in a top-secret chemical weapons test. Many have noted that the family's symptoms seem remarkably similar to some Cold War-era nerve agents. And while this theory may well hold some credence, I think I may have a more feasible alternative. If you remember, the deaths of the family's livestock occurred almost immediately after the construction of their new home commenced. Vietnam is a relatively poor country, and although downtown Saigon might indulge in the same vapid glamour as LA or Paris or London, in the countryside, things are built to last. In all likelihood, the Trans would have wanted their new home to last for generations, maybe even centuries. Therefore, it's safe to assume they wanted to lay solid, concrete foundations. Then, in the course of digging up the earth, maybe even laying a few water pipes, it's entirely possible that the Trans inadvertently struck a mercury deposit, which somehow ended up contaminating their water supply. Just listen to this list of mercury poisoning symptoms: abdominal pain, constipation, headaches, irritability, and tingling in the hands and feet. These line up almost to the letter with the Tran family's symptoms. In severe cases, mercury poisoning can cause memory loss, anemia, seizures, coma, and even death. Again, the anemia lines up with Tran Van Viet being too weak to farm, and Tran Van Ut's son, who suffered a seizure so hard it snuffed out his young life. Another article on mercury poisoning states that, quote-unquote, it causes almost 10% of intellectual disability of otherwise unknown cause and can result in behavioral problems. This accounts for why the Tran family was so mystified by their phantom affliction. It was messing with their brains so much that they didn't know what to look for, or even how to look for it. Then there are the 2 nurses who had aches and bouts of fainting just from being in the presence of the elderly Pham Thi Thang. In high enough concentrations, mercury can indeed contaminate the surrounding air enough to poison someone. As for the Vietnamese government, why would they lie about pesticides being present at the scene? Well, in the most respectful way possible, the Vietnamese government haven't always been the most honest or transparent. It certainly wouldn't be the first time a government minister had covered up a cock-up to save their own skin. What if, many years earlier, some government official had been in charge of a gold mine, or was responsible for the burning of coal? Both are activities that release mercury into the environment, but no doubt that same official would be responsible for the cleanup too. But what if it was quicker and easier to quite literally bury the evidence of negligence so the team could finish whatever project they had early? That would mean a promotion for the team leader, maybe even a bonus for the rank-and-file gold miners. So, instead, they covered it up. Granted, it's pure speculation on my part, but little else could explain why the government would lie about such a thing. Well, in January of 2020, the Vietnam Academy of Science and Technology released a paper which concluded that, quote-unquote, the concentration of mercury in the coastal sediment of Tai Binh is
Fucking
5 times that
hitboxes.
of other areas. Such pollution is possibly a result of some misuses of mercurial fungicides in that region. Therefore, it's necessary to carry out further studies to fully evaluate the risks of this contamination, for example, about its effects on the food chain. I hope the scientists who produced this paper continue to study Tai Binh's mercury pollution, and I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised to find out that their quest for answers leads them right back to a little farm in the countryside, one where 6 members of the same family tragically lost their lives to the same terrible, mysterious affliction. In all likelihood, someone somewhere up in the chain of command in the Vietnamese government has the blood of the Tran family firmly on their hands. Perhaps the only real mystery is if they'll ever face justice for it. On the 9th of July, 1990, in Augsburg, West Germany, 6 US Army intelligence analysts, all with top-secret security clearances, simply walked off their base and disappeared. In the hours that followed, hundreds of heavily armed military policemen rushed into action, attempting to track the soldiers' movements. Those were the final days of the Cold War. The USSR was teetering on the brink of collapse, and US High Command couldn't rule out the possibility of a rogue KGB snatch squad having kidnapped some of their most valuable assets. The full weight of the German-based American military was thrown behind the search and rescue effort, but barely a trace of the 6 soldiers could be found. It was as if they'd simply vanished into thin air. 5 days later, a highway patrol officer was cruising through the town of Gulf Breeze in the US state of Florida, a place infamous for its supposed UFO sightings. Suddenly, the officer spotted a car with a broken taillight and swiftly commenced a traffic stop. Now standing beside the offending vehicle, the officer noticed that its occupants seemed to be acting extremely skittishly, and he soon found out why. They were the 6 missing soldiers from the 701st Military Intelligence Brigade, having somehow gotten all the way to Florida from Germany, despite being globally wanted men. After their prompt arrest, the 6 men were identified as Specialist Vance Davis of Valley Center, Kansas, Private First Class Michael Wexted of Folsom, Wyoming, Private First Class Chris Perlock of Osceola, Wisconsin, Private First Class William Setterberg of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Specialist Kenneth Beeson of Jefferson City, Tennessee, and Sergeant Annette Eccleston of Hartford, Connecticut. At first, it was speculated that the group had engaged in espionage, and if that was the case, then the death penalty would have been on the table. However, the US Army determined that no such crime had been committed, and instead, the group's punishment amounted to little more than a slap on the wrist. For going AWOL and forging leave papers, they were reduced to the lowest rank and forfeited a month's pay, and were honorably discharged just 2 weeks later. After that, rumours of their motives began to flood the media, and the truth proved to be even more bizarre than fiction. Specialist Vance Davis came forward, claiming to be the spokesperson for the group. Then, to the complete disbelief of all who would listen, he told the public that the reason the group had gone AWOL was because, quote-unquote, spirits told them they were needed to help lead the world through an impending cataclysm. What on earth? Davis claimed that the soldiers had contacted the spirits using none other than a Ouija board. "We tried the Ouija board," said Davis. "Someone showed up, and I'm talking spiritually." Davis went on to assert that those same spirits had predicted both the First Gulf War and the 1990 earthquake. Clearly, the group had been in contact with those spirits for a long time. "At the end of May," said Davis, "we were told by the spirits we might think about trying to get out of the service because there's going to be some serious things occurring in the next 5 years, and being in the service wouldn't help us grow and become what we were supposed to become. Then, when we asked the board, it just told us, leave." When asked what he was supposed to become, Davis replied that his group were to be teachers, preparing people for the coming world chaos. This will be the changing of the earth, and Jesus is involved, he insisted in a prepared statement. He will come back. The rapture is real. The changes that Vance Davis referred to included earthquakes, volcano eruptions, a devastating gas leak in New York, and riots in every major US city. In an attempt to assure the public, Vance Davis said that, after the thing occurs, the cataclysm will come back out again to help put the pieces back together. Talking with spirits, predicting the end of the world. That's bizarre behavior for anyone. But remember, these were 6 otherwise intelligent men who were all entrusted with top-level government secrets. They didn't meet at some strange club or a cult group. They all met on duty, and for some reason, they all collectively believed the same story, and all of them risked serious consequences by going AWOL to follow their self-assigned mission through. If it was just 1 or 2 of them who believed in all of this, and were secretly using a Ouija board while on duty, then sure, that's plausible. But all 6 of them? Then again, maybe their prediction wasn't so crazy after all. As we trudge into the 3rd decade of the millennia, things do seem to be getting more and more chaotic out there, geopolitically speaking. If things do go south though, I think we're gonna need more than 6 ex-intelligence analysts to pull us out of the fire, don't you? In northeast Hong Kong, there's a popular recreational area called Sai Kung. It's famous for its hiking spots, beaches, and for its inordinate number of disappearances and deaths. Sai Kung itself isn't particularly big, but the natural beauty of the peninsula has basically remained untouched, and it's full of long and winding trails, so it's easier to see how people might get lost there. That being said, there are signs and markers all along the hiking routes, and each signpost has its own unique set of coordinates written on it. If you were to get lost somewhere, or feel like you were too weak to continue your hike, all you'd have to do is call for help, state the coordinates on the nearest sign, and help would be on the way. That makes it all the weirder that so many people have vanished or perished while exploring Sai Kung, especially when you consider the mysterious circumstances surrounding each incident. In September of 2009, an off-duty police officer was out hiking alone in Sai Kung. He called the emergency services for help and told the operator that he was lost and needed to be rescued. Thankfully, he was right next to one of the marked signposts, so he read off its coordinates to the operator. Strangely, the coordinates he provided didn't match with any on record, meaning the operator had no idea where the officer actually was. The call then ended abruptly, and despite an extensive search and rescue effort, the lost officer was never seen or heard from again. To this day, his whereabouts, or more accurately, the whereabouts of his body, remain a mystery. This incident quickly captured the public's imagination, and a movie was even made about the officer's disappearance, called Missing. His mysterious vanishing didn't surprise some locals, however. It had long been believed that Sai Kung was an ominous place. According to Cantonese folklore, the peninsula was home to some sort of otherworldly portal or barrier, which one should never cross. Only 1 month after the officer went missing, a male and 4 females were out hiking in the same area. The male became tired and told the women to go ahead, said that he'd catch up. He never did. The women went back to look for him, but found no trace of their missing friend. 2 days later, his body showed up next to the trail where they had been searching. His cause of death remains unclear to this day. This man was a Boy Scout troop leader and knew his way around nature very well, adding to the bizarreness of his demise. Later that same year, a bus driver was out hiking alone in Sai Kung. When he didn't return home that day, his family tried calling his phone to check that he was okay. To their surprise, a fisherman answered it, saying that he had found the phone in a river. The bus driver was never found. In 2011, another man called the emergency services, saying that he was lost on a Saikung hiking trail. Just like the lost officer before him, his call suddenly disconnected, and he was never seen or heard from again. A number of other strange deaths have occurred on the Saikung Peninsula, dating all the way back to 2005, right up to more recent incidents in 2019 and even 2020. In each of these instances, a lone male's body was found, resting beside a trail. Foul play is suspected in at least one of these cases, but for the most part, there's been little evidence to suggest that there's a serial killer loose on Saikung, and the majority of these deaths have been attributed to accidental falls. But what about the people who have completely disappeared? The Saikung hiking trails are all clearly marked, well maintained, and aren't known to be treacherous routes. Most of the dead and missing were experienced hikers, and were knowledgeable about the area, and about navigation and basic survival skills. But here's the most interesting part. There is an account from a man named Chung, who became lost in Saikung, but actually managed to make it out alive. According to Chung, he was out hiking in the area, when he suddenly and inexplicably lost consciousness. He awoke at 8 PM and tried to get back to civilization, but in his own words, said that, "When I tried to leave, it was weird. No matter how far I walked, I never got any closer to getting out." On his second day lost in the wilderness, he saw two people and shouted out to them. They didn't react to him, but they both disappeared right in front of his eyes.
Oh my god, I love that.
After resting for a while, he saw another figure come running right out of the tree line.
That's actually pretty good.
He tried chasing after them, hoping they might help him. "I chased that man all the way down," said Chung. "He changed into people I knew, and people I didn't know."
There we go. And then... Oh yeah, I gotta do it this way. I like that. Consume the Spiritomb. I am the Spiritomb. I am the odd keystone. I like that a lot. Thank you. That's actually pretty funny. I don't consider that vor. It's just like a spiritual inflation. I really appreciate that though. That's pretty funny. Thank you. That's really funny. Thank you. I appreciate it.
During that chase, but when I caught up, they all disappeared. Exhausted, Chung fell asleep. When he awoke on the third day, he noticed that several items he had been carrying had disappeared. He also realized that his surroundings had changed, and that he wasn't where he had fallen asleep the previous night. He described the area as having the vibe of an old graveyard, and during that day, he apparently saw many people that all disappeared as he reached out to them. On the fourth day, he awoke to find his surroundings had changed yet again, and that the rocks around him were all making a strange, rumbling noise. He made his way down the trail in front of him, and all the while, the rocks continued to rumble. Eventually, he ran into a young guy from Thailand. Difference was, this guy didn't disappear. He was real, and he lent Chung his cell phone to call for help. After 4 days, Chung finally emerged from the Saikung Mountains. One strange thing that he and his rescuers noticed was that Chung hadn't been bitten by any mosquitoes or other bugs during his whole ordeal. This was June, and the mountains of Saikung were absolutely swarming with the little buggers, making his lack of bite marks extremely strange. A weird story to say the least, but what do you think? Did Chung and the less fortunate souls before him pass through the so-called Saikung barrier and enter some other plane of existence, an alternate dimension? Or can his strange experiences be chalked up to dehydration and exhaustion? Is there some mysterious portal on the Hong Kong Peninsula? Or are all of these deaths and disappearances simply the result of accidents? If so, whatever happened to the remains of the other experienced hikers who still haven't been found? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. A big shout out to Reddit user Hey Lurker here for making one of the only English write-ups of this next mysterious incident. There's something about the open ocean that's inherently unsettling to a lot of people. We all know that the sea can be a cruel mistress, and that in her dark depths she also harbours a lot of equally dark secrets. Well, here's one of them. The year was 1968. The place? La Palma Island in the Canaries. More specifically, Tazacorte, a small town which many transport ships and fishing vessels called home. One such ship at the time was El Fausto, a ship large enough, sturdy enough, and fast enough that it was used for both fishing and transport purposes. On July 20th of that year, she set sail to El Hierro, another island only 50 miles south of La Palma, bringing with her a cargo of agricultural explosives. 3 experienced sailors were on board. 2 brothers, Ramon and Eliberto Hernandez, and their cousin, Miguel Acosta, all of them in their 40s. The men were familiar with El Fausto, having crewed her many times in the past. After a 7-hour-long journey, El Fausto finally reached its destination and unloaded its delivery. While there, the 3-man crew and a man named Julio Garcia, a fellow native of La Palma. Julio had just gotten word that his daughter back home was extremely sick, and he needed to get back to La Palma as soon as possible. He approached the crew of El Fausto and told them about his predicament. Since the next liner back to La Palma wouldn't depart for another 2 days, the 3 sailors agreed to let Julio come back with them, free of charge. On July 21st, at 2:30 a.m., El Fausto and the 4 men set off on another 7-hour voyage back to Tazacorte.
Onto the Ireland, yeah?
Well, those 7 hours passed, and El Fausto still hadn't arrived back home. That wasn't too unusual. They could have been delayed for a number of reasons. But as the hours passed with no sign of the ship or the 4 men aboard her, the sailor's family started to become worried. El Fausto's owner, Rafael Acosta, relative of the 3-man crew, sent another ship out along the exact same route to search for them. Surely this boat would come across the El Fausto on its way, right? Wrong. The waters on the way to El Hierro were clear, and there was no sign of El Fausto sailing back to La Palma. That didn't make any sense. Ramon, Eliberto, and Miguel had made that same journey countless times in much harsher conditions. In fact, sailing conditions that day were almost perfect. The sea was calm, and visibility clear. There was only one explanation. El Fausto must have gone off route for some reason. But why? El Fausto and her crew were immediately reported missing, and all other vessels in the area were asked to keep an eye out for the ship. Planes were sent to scout the ocean from above. It was only a matter of time before El Fausto was found, everyone thought. That prediction turned out to be overly optimistic. Despite it being a clear day, neither the planes nor any of the other boats in the area found any sign of El Fausto. It was like it had vanished into thin air. A horrible thought occurred to everyone back on La Palma. El Fausto must have sunk. 4 days passed with no updates. Just as everyone was starting to come to terms with the loss of all 4 souls aboard El Fausto, the search and rescue team received some amazing news. A British ship had reportedly just spotted El Fausto, floating 120 miles west of La Palma. How it wound up so far off course was anyone's guess, but the British reported that all 4 men on board were still alive, though obviously a little worse for wear, and said that they'd be happy to tow them back home to Tazacorte. For some bizarre reason, the crew on El Fausto said no thank you. The British were confused, of course, and asked what sort of mechanical problems the ship had suffered. Nothing, replied El Fausto's crew. The boat was fine, their communications were fine, nothing was wrong. All 4 men appeared to be of sound mind and weren't delirious or confused about the situation. They once again rejected the British offer to be towed back home, and instead simply asked for enough fuel to make it back home on their own. The British gave them enough fuel, food and water to sustain them for 18 more hours, more than enough to make the journey back home. When news of this broke back in Tazacorte, the locals all began to celebrate. Their 4 lost sons would be home by sunset. Everyone gathered at the port to welcome back the lost men, including, of course, all their family members. There was drinking, and music, and dancing, and a lot of confusion when the sun finally did set, and there was still no sign of El Fausto. The crew's families waited on the dock all night. By morning, it became clear that the ship was now missing for a second time. Planes and ships were sent from the Spanish mainland, all with one clear objective: find the El Fausto. The government spent over $2 million on the rescue effort, but just like before, the elusive hunk of metal had vanished without a trace. After 2 weeks of searching, they gave up the hunt. It wouldn't be until October 9th, 2.5 months after the ship had first gone missing, that an Italian vessel actually came across El Fausto, floating in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. Nobody was on board. Not Ramon, not Eliberto, not Miguel, not Julio. The ship was in perfect working condition. There were no signs of fighting or damage, no records or logbooks, no indication about what had happened whatsoever. Not on the top deck, at least. One of the Italian crew members climbed down into El Fausto's engine room. What he found inside almost made him throw up. On the floor in front of him was the unclothed, partially mummified body of a man. A radio and notebook were found resting next to him. Many pages in this notebook had been torn out, but one remaining page in particular stood out. Spanish writing covered the page, and whatever it said, it appeared to be the end page of a much longer message. The Italians told the Spanish they would tow El Fausto to Venezuela, and from there would send them all the evidence they had.
Where?
Here's where another strange twist occurred in the case. 2 days later, the Spanish authorities received a telegram from the Italian ship. According to them, while en route to Venezuela, El Fausto suddenly and inexplicably sunk. The ship had been lost to the sea, taking with it the half-mummified body on board and most of the evidence. Well, that didn't make any sense. The ship was reportedly in perfect condition. How had this happened? Nobody seemed to know. The remaining evidence that was found on El Fausto eventually arrived in La Palma. Julio Garcia's wife recognized the notebook immediately and confirmed that the message had been written in her husband's handwriting, indicating that the body most likely belonged to Julio. He had scrawled a goodbye message to his wife in the notebook, though it was clear that the beginning pages had been removed. The message ended with the cryptic words, "Don't ever tell our children about what happened to me. You know that God wanted this fate for me."
I got femboyed, huh? Alright, fair enough.
It's clear from those words that Julio knew he was about to lose his life, though since his remains are now somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic, we'll never know how it came to end for sure. Why were the beginning pages of his message missing? What did they say? Did they contain an explanation about what had happened? Where were Ramon, Eliberto, and Miguel? Why had El Fausto been found so far off course? Why did the men reject the help of the British ship that found them? Why did El Fausto itself suddenly sink without any further explanation from the Italians? Why does none of this seem to make any sense? To this day, nobody knows the answers to any of those questions. Many theories have been thrown around, none of them particularly convincing. No matter how you look at it, the mystery of El Fausto doesn't make any sense. With the El Fausto now at the bottom of the sea, the truth about what happened on board will probably never surface. The cases I examine almost always involve deaths and disappearances, but given the subject matter of this video, let's take the opportunity to explore a different kind of mystery altogether. Something a little more otherworldly. In 1972, ufologist J. Allen Hynek created a scale of close encounters designed to help bring scientific credence to the study of extraterrestrials. There are close encounters of the first kind, in which a person merely sees an unidentified flying object. Close encounters of the second kind, in which the alleged UFO causes some sort of physical effect on the observers or the environment. And most infamously, close encounters of the third kind, where an actual extraterrestrial being is seen by witnesses. Considered by many to be the most credible report of an alien encounter in history, this is the story of the Ariel School Incident, a close encounter of the third kind. Located in the rural town of Ruwa, Zimbabwe, Ariel is a private primary school whose student body is made up of youngsters from the wealthiest families in the area, some of them native Zimbabweans, many of them from South Africa and the UK. It was September 14th, 1994. A group of 62 students, all of them aged between 5 and 12, were out playing in a large field just behind the school during break time, away from the view of all the teachers, who were inside having a meeting. It was 10:15 a.m. Halfway through the recess, some of the students came rushing back inside, many of them shaken and clearly terrified. They started babbling to the teachers about two creatures that they had just met in the schoolyard. According to the testimonies of those 62 children, while out playing in the field, they noticed several silver orbs floating above the school. These objects occasionally flashed red before vanishing in a burst of light, only for them to reappear moments later. Shortly afterwards, a large, disc-like, silver object descended from the sky and began hovering just above the ground. 4 smaller discs floated down alongside it. All the students rushed to see what these objects were. When they got close, they noticed 2 humanoid figures, which they all described as little men, both of them about 3 feet tall. One of them sat atop the main craft. The other ran back and forth along the ground, seemingly examining the terrain. After 15 minutes, the crafts ascended back into the sky and out of view, taking the 2 creatures with them. Now here's where the story gets interesting. Obviously, the teachers all thought the children were just being silly and playing some sort of imaginative game. When they all went home after school and told their parents, the adults started taking their claims a little more seriously. There were 62 kids all saying the exact same thing after all, so they were all individually questioned. All of their accounts of the incident were disturbingly similar. Firstly, they were asked to describe the little men that they saw. Consistently, they all talked about the men having large, elongated heads, stretched, rugby-like eyeballs that sat low on their cheeks, small mouths with no lips, no discernible ears, and long, scrawny necks. They also all mentioned them wearing black, shiny, skin-tight suits, and that they both had long, black hair. Now you might think the students' descriptions were so consistent, because that pretty much sounds like a stereotypical alien, but bear in mind that many of these youngsters didn't even know what an alien was, and weren't even familiar with the concept of them. In interviews, many of the local children referred to them as tokoloshi, evil goblins from African folklore that feast on children. Others thought that they were magic gardeners, given how they were going up and down the grounds. Only a handful of them brought up the idea of aliens. The fact that the students came from a diverse set of backgrounds meant that a lot of different interpretations came up, suggesting that none of them had been coached on what to say. Many of these interviews were filmed, and if you watch the footage, you'll notice that all the students appear to be acting very authentically and believably. As one female student put it, "I swear by every hair on my head and the whole Bible that I'm telling the truth." The most scary part of their testimonies came when they were asked what the little men actually did when they landed. 12 of the students were asked this, and with varying degrees of eloquence, they all said the same thing. They all mentioned that when they got close to the 2 beings, time seemed to slow down or stop. They said that one of the entities noticed them and then disappeared into thin air, only to reappear moments later. The 2 now motionless beings stared at the students. When the students looked into the creature's quote-unquote horrible eyes, they instantly became transfixed. The beings then communicated with them telepathically. According to the students, the little men flashed terrifying images into their heads, which they interpreted as a frightening warning. A warning about environmental destruction and the dangers of technology and pollution, concepts many of them weren't even aware of beforehand. According to one student, he interpreted the images as meaning, "The world is going to end.
Giants.
After our planet or the air. Like all the trees will go down, and there'll be no air. People will be dying." Those thoughts came from the man's eyes. So, what makes this case so credible in the eyes of ufologists and alien enthusiasts? Well, firstly, the fact that there were 62 witnesses, all with a consistent story. Many of these witnesses were unaware of the concept of a UFO, but they all used folklore creatures from their respective cultures to paint a very similar picture about their interpretations. Bad child actors are easy to spot, but the footage of all of them describing the ordeal comes across as totally natural, unrehearsed, and uncoached. Not to mention, many of them were interviewed years later as adults, and they all stand by what they said back in 1994, and seem to have genuinely been emotionally affected by their experience. Unlike most people who fake encountering aliens, these men and women aren't attention seekers, and have seemingly done their best to avoid bringing up the incident, worried about being judged or publicly humiliated if they talk about it. Finally, it's also worth noting that on the morning of the incident, numerous eyewitnesses across South Africa reported seeing a meteor-like object flash through the sky. The prospect of this being some sort of prank is highly unlikely, given how seriously such claims would have been treated in rural Zimbabwe, particularly back in 1994. Given that many parents would have genuinely feared their kids being demonically possessed by a Tokoloshi, this would have been no joking matter. That leaves only two possible explanations: mass hysteria or authentic close encounter. Personally, I'd side with Scully over Mulder on this one. I'm much more inclined to go with a terrestrial explanation rather than an extraterrestrial one. The students got collectively excited about something in the playfield, and then suggestive questioning by interviewers convinced them all that they really had had that experience. That being said, many people believe otherwise, and cite this as one of the most credible accounts.
I'm gonna have to stop the guy right there and just give my little 2 cents on this, by the way, because I am a very big, firm believer of extraterrestrial life, and that they occasionally peer into our dumb little planet for the sake of funnies, and maybe a little bit of research, but mostly funnies at this point, I think. Mass hysteria does not explain that. Because if it were mass hysteria, 62 people would not give the exact same description so flawlessly. And nor would it have stuck to the children only. Nor would they have said the same exact thing when questioned individually. When you question a group of people individually and they all give you the same exact story and their story never changes from the 90s to now, you have aliens. That's not mass hysteria. Also, thank you, Bandit Queen. I appreciate that. This is not my typical size, however. I just got given the femboy body because my chat likes to mess with my shape. Also, my mic is off tonight, but I just chimed in with my own little 2 cents on that discussion for the video I have in the background.
Accounts of alien interaction for all the reasons previously stated. But what do you think? Little green men or little white lies? The truth is out there.
They're not green, they're gray.
A much more grounded mystery with a spacey context for this one. Founded by a man called Edward Mielnik back in 1990, Antrovis was a Polish cult that held some very strange beliefs, to say the least. According to Mielnik, 8 billion years ago, Earth was visited by 2 spaceships, one of them containing the Slavic peoples, who originally come from the planet Atlanta. Like many other cultists, the followers of Antrovis wholeheartedly believe that the world was soon about to end, and that the only way to survive the apocalypse was by escaping in their Slavic spaceship. In their minds, the aliens would return in their ship just before the Earth's destruction, save the dedicated Antrovis members from certain death, and take them to the planet Marinda. Thing is, the alien spaceship needed to be powered somehow, and the only fuel source was the energy found within the people of Central Europe. Apparently, World War II was some sort of plot to kill as many Central Europeans as possible, so that the guy with the Chaplin mustache, no, the other one, could escape Earth with all his friends. Pretty crazy stuff. Anyway, it was the early 90s. Antrovis was certain the end was nigh, and that their alien spacecraft would soon arrive. They needed to get their hands on some of that sweet, sweet spaceship power quickly, or else they'd all be doomed. How did they plan to harvest that power? By giving up their body parts. Many members started to mutilate themselves in order to help power the ship. Many male members cut off the parts of themselves that contained the most powerful energy, namely their family jewels. Oh, it hurts to even say it. What they actually did with these chopped off bits remains unclear. Now, from an outsider's perspective looking in, this could all seem darkly comical. But here's where things turn from darkly comical to darkly tragic. In their quest to harvest as much energy as possible, it seems Antravis may have turned to murder. In August of 1993, Andrei Cielecki, 18, vanished on his way to school, never to be seen again. Because of his interest in ufology, the young man had gotten heavily involved with Antravis, and over time, his parents noticed that his behavior was becoming weirder and weirder. He'd sit alone in his room for hours, meditating, ignoring his schoolwork and friends. Over time, he started to show signs of fear and agitation, saying that he thought someone was out to get him. He stopped sleeping and barely ate any food because he was so worried someone was trying to poison him. Not long afterwards, he went missing. Though many suspect Antravis were responsible, no concrete evidence was ever found linking the group to Andrei's disappearance. Around the same sort of time, another young man, only 16, also vanished. He too had links to Antravis. The group liked to recruit younger, more impressionable members, much to the behest of the inductees' parents. In 1995, a PE teacher and fellow member of Antravis also disappeared. His remains were actually found in the Odra River. His head had been battered in, and someone had removed his manhood with surgical precision. 2 surgeons who were members of Antravis were questioned, but the authorities were unable to link them to the teacher's demise, and the case went cold. Though all 3 of these cases are still technically unsolved, it's strongly suspected that Antravis were responsible for the teacher's death, and that the 2 aforementioned boys suffered the same fate at the hands of its members. Though Antravis has since formally disbanded,
Absolutely no survival instinct. I see shiny Wisp, I go grope it. I do not care if there is an alpha
since it's extremely common for
foot in front of my face
to become estranged from their families and friends. It's very likely more people were selected for involuntary harvest. Their sudden and mysterious disappearances simply never reported. Question is, how many? Hi guys, ladies.
Okay, I will in fact be right back to get a drink, so give me a few minutes. I might have to let the Keurig heat up. Arcus, no, I'm gonna mommy you through Rise. I know what I said. I'll be right back. So yeah, let me go get like a hot drink or something. Would probably help a bit. Maybe a painkiller just to level that out, I think. Hello. Okay, I'm back. I have green tea with honey and a little bit of honey and milk and a little bit of sugar, just because I like things sweet. God, I love the amount of thigh wobble. Jesus, it's like fucking Jello. All right, let's continue with the spooky things in the background and looking for ghosts.
Today's video is sponsored by Raycon. Well, the end of summer is nigh, and spooky season day 3 next way. This case over on the Unsolved Mysteries subreddit. It was super helpful in learning about this case. Now let's take a trip back to 1930. The place? Yongcheon Village, South Korea. The entire nation was under Japanese control at this point in time, and life for most people was rough. Koreans were effectively considered second-class citizens in their own country, and there was a general fear of authority. Life in the rural Yongcheon village had been extremely safe before Japanese occupation, but under their strict control, crime was at an all-time low. Theft was rare, murder unheard of. It was on April 26th of that year that one of the village labourers, 16-year-old Park Chang-soo, mysteriously disappeared from Yongcheon. He hadn't so much as said goodbye to his mother or told anyone where he was going. With no way to contact him, everyone just assumed that Chang-soo had some urgent business to take care of, and that he'd be back in a few days. Well, 3 days later, a local woman was walking on the outskirts of the village when she made a horrifying discovery. Lying on a hillside was the lifeless body of a young man. Whoever he was, his face had been so badly beaten that he was unrecognizable. An empty A-frame and a towel were found on the earth beside him. Whoever had taken his life had wrapped the towel around his neck and strangled all of the life out of him. For the people of Yongcheon, the unthinkable had just happened. There had been a murder, and, more shockingly, one of their own must have been responsible. Japanese investigators arrived at the scene and immediately went door to door, asking if anyone from the village had disappeared in the past few days. Only one person had, Park Chang-soo. Chang-soo's mother was asked to come down to the morgue and take a look at the body. She gazed upon the beaten young man lying on the slab before her and confirmed that, yes, it was indeed her son. It was Park Chang-soo.
Chat, that was a shiny ghastly, holy shit.
Gave themselves a pat on the back. They had already solved half the mystery. Now all they had to do was figure out who had taken Chang-soo's life.
Finally, a good fucking shiny.
It came to light that on the morning of April 26th, just before Chang-soo went missing, 2 people had been seen beating the young man. They were Ko Ok-dan, Chang-soo's boss and the keeper of the inn where he worked, and Cho Ki-jun, Chang-soo's co-worker at the inn. Ko Ok-dan and Cho Ki-jun were now the prime suspects. They were both rounded up immediately and taken in for questioning. At first, they both denied any involvement in Chang-soo's demise, but after 2 days of interrogation, which likely involved some heavy physical persuasion, Cho Ki-jun made a full confession, saying that he and Ko Ok-dan had conspired to kill Park Chang-soo. According to Cho Ki-jun, both he and Ko Ok-dan wanted vengeance on Park Chang-soo. You see, Ko was a married woman, but being both young and beautiful, she caught the eye of many men in Yongcheon. One of those men was a guy named Lee. Lee asked Ko to run away with him. Now Ko was a married woman, but rather than saying no, she instead told Lee that she'd think about it. Scandalous. Park Chang-soo overheard this interesting piece of gossip, and rather than keeping his lips sealed, decided to spill the beans to Ko's wealthy husband in the next village over. Needless to say, her husband was furious, and Ko was subsequently punished. Ko quickly learned that Park Chang-soo was the one who had blabbed, and decided he would pay for this betrayal with his life. She recruited Cho Ki-jun to help her. Under cover of darkness, they both dragged Park Chang-soo out to the hills, beat him to the point of near death, and then strangled him with the towel found at the scene. Now before a judge, Cho expressed his remorse, but Ko maintained her innocence. They were sentenced to 10 years and 15 years respectively. Park Chang-soo was given a small burial ceremony somewhere, and for the people of Yongcheon village, life went on as normal. Drama over. Case closed. Then, 6 months later, on October 18th, Park Chang-soo's mother heard someone outside her front door. The people of the village had been giving her a lot of support since her son's death, and she assumed it was one of them, coming to lend a sympathetic ear. She went to greet whichever one of her neighbors it was, but when she saw the figure in her doorway, she couldn't believe her eyes. Standing there, on her doorstep, was none other than Park Chang-soo, her dead son. She let out a terrified shriek, thinking the ghost of her son had come back to visit her. In reality, the young man in front of her was alive and well. It really was Chang-soo. He sat his mother down and explained that Ko-ok-dan and Cho Ki-jun had taken him out to the hills 6 months prior. They had indeed beaten him and tried to snuff him out with the towel. He had survived though, but had been too afraid to come back to the village, fearing they had finished the job. So he instead walked to another settlement and worked as a labourer. That's when word arrived that Ko and Cho had been locked up, and he felt safe enough to come home. Everyone in Yongcheon was understandably in disbelief. Their heads swirled with questions, the main one being, if that wasn't Chang-soo's body they found on the hillside, whose was it? The Japanese detectives, now in deep water, questioned why Park's mother had confirmed it was her son's dead body in the first place. Surely she must have recognized it wasn't him. Well, as mentioned before, the dead man's face was extremely bruised. Even still, you'd think she would have recognized her own son, especially since the body was wearing clothes that obviously didn't belong to him. Then again, she likely just complied out of fear. As most Koreans back in those days knew, the Japanese police didn't take kindly to troublemakers and time wasters. It was best to just tell them what they wanted to hear. Well, that sense of fear had come back to bite the officers. Now they were left with the unidentified body of a young man who evidently wasn't even from the village, and 2 people in prison for the murder of a living man. Despite the fact that Chang-soo was still alive, both Ko-ok-dan and Cho Ki-jun had been found guilty in court, and as such, the prosecutors didn't want to ask for a retrial. For quite some time, the pair remained locked up for a crime they hadn't committed. Eventually, they were given their retrial, and Cho said that he had only confessed because he had been forced to during his interrogation. Both he and Ko were released, and with Park Chang-soo back in the village, everything had returned to the way it had once been. Except, there was still that one unanswered question. Who did the body on the hillside belong to? To this day, nobody knows. Like I said, Yongcheon village was an area where murders were unheard of. And yet, Ko and Cho just so happened to take Chang-soo out to this one particular part of remote hillside to kill him. Failed to do so, and then, 3 days later, there just so happened to be a different murder victim found there. What are the odds of that? Astronomically low. This has led to a few interesting theories. Theory number 1. Park Chang-soo really was killed on the hillside that fateful night, and the man who returned to the village 6 months later was someone else entirely. An imposter. Park's mother, in a state of delusional grief, accepted this person as her son, as has happened in numerous cases in the past.
And now we go on to the beach.
That theory's a bit of a stretch though, considering the whole town would have needed to be fooled into believing it was really him. Theory number 2. Park, Ko, and Cho were actually in cahoots. The 3 of them had joined forces to kill this unidentified young man for some undetermined reason, and did so on April 26th. Making sure to injure his face beyond recognition.
The giant horse cock
Then,
weighs up
Park
9
went into
pounds.
hiding for 6 months, while Ko and Cho took the heat, knowing that Park would later return to clear their names. Any evidence would be long gone by that point, and everyone would be too confused to point fingers at any of them. That theory's a bit of a long shot as well. But then again, so is this next one. Theory number 3. Park Chang-soo told Ko's wealthy husband about that Lee fella trying to run off with his wife. Enraged, the husband paid Park to kill Lee, destroy his face, and then to hide out with him for a while. In the meantime, someone else would take the fall, probably his cheating wife. Then again, the autopsy at the time suggested that the victim was around 16, just like Park. The husband's love rival, Lee, was a fully grown man. There are a few other theories floating around out there, but they all make about as much sense as these 3. Then again, when all the plausible options have been ruled out, the true answer must be implausible. Until we figure out what that answer is, the details about what happened that fateful day almost a century ago will remain shrouded in mystery. Another mystery from the past now, but one that's just as cryptic. The Roaring Twenties were an interesting time in the West. In the wake of the Great War, the world was modernizing. Glitz and glamour took center stage. Women could now vote. The everyman was more affluent, and automobiles were now commonplace in the US and Western Europe. Air travel was still in its infancy, and commercial flights were a luxury reserved for the wealthiest members of society. For people like Alfred Lowenstein. In the late 20s, Lowenstein was the 3rd richest man in the world. The Belgian national had made his fortune by providing electric power facilities for developing countries. Back then, he was world famous for his business savvy. Today though, he's instead remembered for his extremely mysterious death. It was the 4th of July, 1928. Lowenstein and several of his employees boarded a private aircraft in Croydon, England, headed to Brussels, Belgium. In total, there were 7 people on board. The weather that evening was clear. Flying conditions good. Everything was going according to plan. That is, until about halfway into the flight. While crossing the English Channel at an altitude of 4,000 feet, Lowenstein stood up and went to use the bathroom at the rear of the plane. As you can see on this diagram, the cabin of the plane was separated from the back compartment. As Lowenstein stepped into this back compartment, the bathroom door would have been on his left, and the plane's exit door on his right. 5 minutes went by, then 10, then 20. Lowenstein sure is taking a long time in the bathroom, thought his employees. Someone had better go and check on him just in case he's sick. Lowenstein's secretary went to the back compartment of the plane where the bathroom was. Nothing seemed out of place. The secretary knocked on the bathroom door and asked if everything was all right. There was no response. That's because Lowenstein wasn't inside.
Yeah, I'll just say it with my own voice. Say what you want. But, Sylveon ranks pretty low on my list of evolutions. I've ordered them all by favorite, from most favorite to least favorite. Though Espeon and Umbreon are tied. I think Espeon's just ever so slightly more. But yeah. Sylveon's actually my second least liked. Now, again, that's purely because of bias. I love the originals, and I like Glaceon a little bit more than Jolteon, because Glaceon's an interesting one. Leafeon is, like, the worst, in my personal opinion, and nothing will ever change that. But, like, Sylveon, I think, is just overrated. I like Sylveon. I just think it's overrated. But I also don't really go for it. I always go for Espeon or Umbreon. They always have the highest priority. Flareon's just really cute and fluffy. Vaporeon's cute and sleek. I like the fishy aesthetic. Glaceon's just really cool, no pun intended. And Jolteon's cool and spiky. Like the tomboy of the group. Very fast. Very zappy. I like it. Leafeon's a fucking disappointment. I don't care what anyone says. It's a disappointing design. I think it's the face, mostly, of anything. Maybe the colors. Sylveon's just... I know. I don't care. I think Sylveon's overrated. Sylveon Anthros on Fur Affinity, however, tasty. But like, well, most of them are anyway. But like in actual Pokemon games, I don't really go for Sylveon, cause why go for Sylveon when I can have Gardevoir, who is just superior in every way when it comes to being a Pokemon. Yeah, I said that. Anyway.
In fact, he wasn't anywhere on board the plane at all. His secretary ran to the front of the aircraft and told the pilot that their boss was gone. He must have fallen out the exit door. The pilot's reaction to this was strange. Instead of flying to the nearest airfield to land the plane, the pilot, Donald Drew, instead opted to land on a beach at St. Paul, France. The French authorities stationed on the beach quickly arrived and detained all of the passengers and crew. Obviously, everyone was confused, but they all seemed to agree that their boss, none other than Alfred Lowenstein, had just fallen 4,000 feet into the English Channel. A search and rescue operation was launched, but it was all in vain. 15 days later, on July 19th, a bloated corpse was found bobbing in the water just off the French coast. The body was wearing Lowenstein's wristwatch. That's how they identified who it was. Despite 2 weeks of hopeful thinking, the third richest man in the world was now confirmed to be dead. Lowenstein's wife immediately called for an autopsy. Her husband was an incredibly smart man. There's no way he would have just opened the plane's exit door instead of the bathroom one and then fallen out of it. Nor would he have jumped out of the plane on purpose. Alfred was a happy man with plans for the future. The autopsy revealed that Lowenstein was alive when he struck the water. There were no signs of foul play, nor was there any indication that Lowenstein had intentionally taken his own life. Something odd did flag up though. A small amount of alcohol was found inside Lowenstein's system. Lowenstein famously never drank, and none of his employees had seen him drinking on the plane. The investigation into what happened to Alfred Lowenstein was strange to say the least. Given that he was extremely rich and well known, you'd have thought that the officers on the case would have gone over every detail with a fine-tooth comb. Instead, the whole investigation was shoddily handled, with very little effort put into figuring out what actually happened. The pilot, Donald Drew, and the aircraft's mechanic, Robert Little, both testified that the exit door was very easy to open from the inside, and that Lowenstein must have mistaken the exit for the bathroom door. Neither Drew nor Little were under oath when they made these testimonies. Still, this was enough for the case to be put to rest, and it was officially concluded that Lowenstein's demise was accidental. Now you, my dear viewers, are probably thinking, that's a bit weird. Isn't it really difficult to open a plane's exit door mid-flight? Well, yes, it is. Turns out that Drew and Little were exaggerating when they said that the door was easy to open from the inside. After Lowenstein's untimely end, numerous tests were conducted on the plane to prove this. Even when a muscle-bound gentleman from the British Air Ministry threw his full weight into the door at an altitude of 1,000 feet, the door only opened a mere 6 inches before being slammed shut by the slipstream, immediately throwing him back inside. It would have been impossible for Lowenstein, or anyone else for that matter, to have opened the door either accidentally or intentionally. So, with those two possibilities ruled out, that leaves us with foul play. In the decades since this incident occurred, the theory that Lowenstein was murdered has become more and more accepted, and several potential suspects have been identified. First, Drew and Little, the pilot and the mechanic. The fact that they both lied in their testimonies suggests that they may have been hiding something. Some have even speculated that the two were paid to take Lowenstein out. Drew in particular seems to have come into a hefty sum of money after Lowenstein's so-called accident, and went on to live a short but very opulent life. In his book, The Man Who Fell from the Sky, author William Norris suggests that Drew and Little replaced the exit door with a dummy that could easily be opened mid-flight, and kept the real door in the luggage section of the plane. After waiting for Lowenstein to use the bathroom, one of them opened the rig door, which flew off, and then pushed Lowenstein out. Drew then intentionally landed on the beach instead of an airfield. That way, the pair of them could fit the real door back into place, keeping the employees in the main cabin to avoid any witnesses. But if this theory is to be believed, the obvious question is, who paid them? Well, being a rich and powerful man, Lowenstein of course had his fair share of enemies. There was Henri Dreyfus, a business rival of Lowenstein's. Lowenstein was taking Dreyfus to court after the latter ran an expose on him. Dreyfus stood to lose not only his fortune, but his reputation as well. He certainly had a strong motive. Then there's Alfred Pam and Frederick Salvasi, Lowenstein's business partners. Their company made a fortune thanks to a number of life insurance policies that they had taken out on Lowenstein shortly before he perished. There's the American crime boss, Arnold Rothstein, who Lowenstein had allegedly been making shady deals with. If that connection's true, it's possible these deals went sour, and Rothstein was proving that even the third richest man in the world couldn't trifle with him. Finally, there's Lowenstein's wife, Madeline. She, of course, stood to gain complete control over her late husband's fortune, and it should be noted that she didn't even attend his funeral. There is one theory that we haven't explored yet. The possibility that Alfred Lowenstein faked his own death. The body pulled from the water was badly decomposed, and was only determined to be Lowenstein thanks to the watch on his wrist. There was also alcohol in the body's system when Alfred didn't drink at all, suggesting it was someone else entirely. Not to mention, this body was then buried in an unmarked grave. Is it possible Lowenstein paid off the coroner, the investigators, and his employees so he could fake his own end? Writers Robert and Carol Bridgestock think so, claiming that because of financial irregularities in his business, Lowenstein needed to disappear. If anyone had the means to do so, it was him. These were the days before televisions, remember, so even though Lowenstein's name was well known, his face wouldn't have been. He could have started afresh somewhere new, with more money in his pockets than he could spend in a lifetime. Still, all of these are just theories. There are too many unanswered questions for us to form any definitive conclusion. All I know is that with so much mystery and intrigue, this case would make an awesome period drama film, or even a miniseries. Antarctica. Desolate, mysterious, dangerous. With a population of only 4,000 people during the summer and 1,000 during the winter, it might surprise you to hear that the continent has had its fair share of crime over the years. Isolation, boredom, unforgiving temperatures, and booze can play havoc on the human mind. So even though most people stationed in the icy wasteland are well-educated, mild-mannered scientists, the interactions between them can sometimes reach boiling point. For instance, the first recorded crime on the continent occurred back in 1959, when two Russians at the Vostok Research Center got into a fight over a chess game. A fight that involved an ice axe. Chess was subsequently banned in all Russian Arctic stations. The case we're focusing on in this entry, however, occurred much more recently, in the year 2000. The Amundsen Scott South Pole Research Station, one of the most remote places on the planet, was home to 50 workers at the time, most of them scientists, technicians, and skilled workers. One of the people stationed there was Rodney David Marks, an Australian astrophysicist. Rodney was a confident and playful man, very well liked at the base camp, though his sense of humour and Tourette syndrome sometimes led to a few arguments and bruised egos. Still, Rodney was a nice guy, and always made sure to make amends and offer a helping hand, not only to those he had upset, but to everyone generally. That makes what happened to him all the more confusing. On May 11th, Rodney was making his way back to the main base from the observatory. His fiancée Sonia was also working at the station. She had taken up the position so she could be closer to him. He was no doubt thinking of her when he suddenly became unwell. He began having difficulty breathing, and his vision was becoming cloudy and weak. By the time he got back to the base to see Sonia, he was feeling absolutely awful. He told everyone not to worry, said that he was going to bed early to try and sleep it off. But things only got worse. On the morning of May 12th, Rodney woke up and immediately began vomiting blood. His stomach burned. His muscles burned. It even felt like his bones were burning. His eyes became so sensitive that he needed to wear sunglasses, even though the sun hadn't risen in the past 3 weeks. He went to visit the station's doctor, Robert Thompson, 3 times over the course of 36 hours, but Dr. Thompson couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. On the 3rd visit, Rodney was in such a state of panic that Dr. Thompson thought the pain must all be in his head. He injected Rodney with an antipsychotic, and almost immediately, he calmed down. Perhaps this was all in his head after all. Or perhaps not. Shortly after receiving the shot, Rodney went into cardiac arrest. They tried to revive him, but their efforts were in vain. At 6:45 p.m. on May 12th, Rodney David Marks was pronounced dead. He was only 32 years old. Dr. Thompson determined that he had died from unspecified natural causes. But that wasn't actually the case. As you're about to hear, Rodney may have just become Antarctica's first murder victim. Since it was too cold for any planes to land at the station, Rodney's body had to be left in a storage room for 6 months, preserved by the freezing temperatures. It was then flown out for an autopsy at the mainland base in New Zealand. During their examination, the coroners discovered something truly unexpected. Rodney hadn't passed away from natural causes after all. He had died from methanol poisoning, a substance readily available in the base's lab facilities. He had about 150 milliliters in his system, about the size of a glass of wine. That's what caused all of his symptoms and eventual death. Upon discovering that, New Zealand dispatched an investigation team to the base immediately. In the meantime, the rest of the workers had to sit tight, now knowing that a potential killer was hiding amongst them. One can only imagine the sense of paranoia and panic they were feeling during that time. Eventually, the inquiry team arrived. They quickly realized it would have been impossible for Rodney to consume a lethal dose of methanol unwittingly. All of the containers in the lab were clearly labeled and stored separately from anything drinkable. They also believed that Rodney hadn't intentionally poisoned himself either. He showed no signs of wanting to end things, had no financial problems, and had many future plans to look forward to, including his own wedding and the end of his research. It was obvious. Rodney was the victim of an intentional poisoning. Due to Antarctica being a disputed territory, the investigation into Rodney's demise proved very difficult to conduct. Although Amundsen Scott is an American research station, it's situated in territory claimed by New Zealand, hence why Rodney's autopsy was performed there. Thing is, the US doesn't recognize New Zealand's claim to the land. Relations between the two countries over the issue has always been icy, but now things were really getting heated. It's complicated stuff, but from my understanding, the US said that their workers at the base were exempt from being questioned if they didn't want to be. So, of the 49 people left alive at the station, only 13 of them were ever questioned. When the investigators asked the US for background information on the scientists, all they got back was radio silence. As a result, the cause of Rodney's methanol poisoning has never been determined. Could his killer be one of the people in this photo, taken 4 months after his passing? If so, who, and what was their motivation? We know that spending years in Antarctica can drive people a little loopy. Did one of them just snap and decide to drop some poison in Rodney's glass? Did one of them take offense at his jokes? Then again, perhaps this was just a mistake after all. Maybe the conclusion, that someone had taken Rodney's life, was incorrect. People do drink a lot at these Arctic research stations, just to get through the monotony of each day. Remember, there's no internet, no sunlight, and you see the same old faces day in and day out. Maybe Rodney tried experimenting with some items he had found in the lab to spice up his drinks, and was too embarrassed to confess to Dr. Thompson what he had done, despite all of the pain he was clearly in. Perhaps there's another explanation altogether. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. A big thank you to ship. Find that link in the description box below. Stay curious, and become... Our planned camping spot for the night was full. We'd backpacked all day to get to that location, and there wasn't anywhere close to set up our tents. We called our guy on the outside to come and pick us up, as it was getting late. We didn't have anywhere to set up camp, and a storm was approaching. We hiked to the nearest exit point on the trail, met our pickup guy, and he drove us a few miles to the nearest campsite we were familiar with,
Model
we could
reset.
basically drive up
Spend
to.
your points.
It was a long logging path, pretty deep in the mountains, that we'd all hiked in the previous years, so we were kind of familiar with the area. Anyways, we hop out the van, and it's pitch black outside. No moon. It's April in the mountains, and still pretty chilly. We're cold, hungry, and exhausted. That's when we notice a man staring at us from behind a tree. I know this sounds like a no-sleep story, but it's 100% true, and probably the most scared I've ever been. We noticed this guy. No headlamp, no equipment, no backpack. He's just standing there. One of our group, a former Marine, yells at him to come out and explain what his deal is. This guy walks a few feet out from behind the tree, and we all shine our lights on him. And I kid you not, this dude's white t-shirt is covered in what looks like blood smears. He's pretty rough looking. Long hair, long beard, crazy eyes, and he was wearing a red smeared t-shirt and shorts in 1-degree weather at night. We're all pretty freaked out, and this is an experienced hiking group who've all seen some stuff. We ask this guy what his deal is, and he simply says, "We can't camp here." Well, we tell him that's exactly what we plan to do, and he says, "I don't think that's a good idea for any of you." We kind of turn to discuss as a group, and when we look back, he's hidden back behind the tree. As a group, we basically decide none of us are getting any sleep that night if we stay there, so we pack up the van and leave. As we were pulling out, this guy pulled out one of those red-filtered flashlights and ran after our van. I'm not kidding, he followed us for at least a quarter mile on foot. He was fast as all hell. We passed a park ranger on the road and flagged him down to tell him how weird this dude was acting. He said he'd go and investigate. I didn't hear anything else about it for 5 years. For the longest time, I thought he was probably a moonshiner who was just living in the woods and didn't want us near his still. People hunt out there all the time, which could maybe explain the blood smears a little bit. But I was recently at an event with some of those guys again for the first time in years, and that creepy dude from the woods got brought up in conversation. One of them, who still lives nearby, brought out his phone and said,
"Ah! Menagerie VT, thank you for the raid. Arigato ne." Just to give a little quick introduction, I'm Mama Nile. Well, I'm Mama Nile's handler, that is to say. I'm using my alternate, more personalized avatar that has funny features where I get bigger if you redeem points. I have spooky videos playing in the background while I'm just vibing with no mics. Well, mostly no mic. My throat's raggedy as fuck right now, so I'm just sipping hot drinks and hunting for Spiritomb. Or Spiritomb Wisps. Thank you for the raid. Layers of Fear. I have that game. I should play that at some point. I've been having fun with it. That's a cool game. Sleepy and almost done with Layers of Fear. I see. Well, you can lie on down and vibe out. It's good to vibe. This is a vibe stream, so we're just listening to spooky videos while we hunt the ghost wisps, which I think is a pretty fitting thing. But yeah. Oh, there's a new version. Oh, I didn't even know that. Okay. Well, I'm glad that you are having fun at least.
"Oh, I forgot to tell you guys. I saw him again. He pulls up a news article, and there he was, so obviously the same guy. He'd been arrested for murdering some poor girl on that trail. Timelines didn't match up, so I fully believe we saw this guy shortly after he'd murdered someone else. He hasn't been charged with anything else as far as I'm aware. I'm not backpacking without a gun anymore. I was dating this guy for about 2 months. It was just another Friday night. I ordered a pizza and went into his bedroom to watch TV while I waited for it. He was on his laptop in the dining area. He started acting odd, kept saying that he wanted to cage fight my ex-husband who he had never met. I remember getting and paying for the pizza. Then he asks me, "What did you do that for?" I had no idea what he was talking about. He proceeds to attack me. He pins me to the ground and begins choking me. Well, I was sure he was going to kill me. I managed to reach up between his legs and grabbed and twisted as hard as I could. He rolled me over, bit my shoulder, then let me go. I still have the scar from that bite. I ran to his bedroom, looking for my phone. This was back before most phones had screen locks, but I was in such a panic, I didn't realize I could call for help with his phone. I made the mistake of telling him I was calling the cops, but still hadn't found my phone yet. He struggled with me, then stopped and went into his closet. I managed to find my phone by that point, but didn't get a chance to call. He came out with my ex-husband's gun that he had stolen from my house. He struggled with me on the bed. I thought for sure I was dead at that point. Then he abruptly gets up and stands at the foot of the bed. 1 second he's standing there. The next, he's gone. Apparently, I totally blocked out the part where he put a round through his head. I finally managed to call 911, but I didn't know his address. The cops finally showed up, but he was already dead by then. He was a bodybuilder. Turns out, he bought some illegal roids off the internet. The presumption was he either took too many or had a bad reaction that caused him to flip out. I haven't thought about that whole incident for a long time. This happened 14 years ago, and retelling it has had an effect that I didn't know was still there. I was home alone one evening, since my wife was working late. She's a doctor at a local hospital, and late nights are a common occurrence. I'd recently been working on my baking skills, and thought I'd surprise her by baking her an apple pie for when she got home. I took it out of the oven and set it on the kitchen counter to rest, then went into the living room to watch TV and wait for my wife. We live in a safe neighborhood, so I had left the back door unlocked for her. That way, she could get in through the house's side gate and enter directly into the kitchen. It was around 10 p.m. when I heard her come in through the back door. I shouted a hello from the comfort of the living room. Weird thing was, she didn't shout hi back. I heard her moving about in the kitchen, and yelled for her to take some pie if she wanted some, but she still didn't say a word back to me, or even come in to say hi. Must have been a hard night or something. After a few minutes, the show ends, and I get up and walk into the kitchen to see what she's doing. She's not there. I look at the pie on the counter and see that a single slice has been cut out. She obviously hadn't taken a plate, because there were crumbs all over the floor, leading into the adjoining dining room. She must have gone in there to eat at the table. But the lights were off, and the dining room was pitch black. I asked if she was in there, but again, didn't get anything back. Maybe she'd gone upstairs and I hadn't heard her? I decided to go up and check, but first went to cut myself a slice of the pie I'd made. Now it had cooled down. I reach for the knife, but that's when I realize it's missing. The large carving blade we keep in the block on the counter. It was gone. I get a weird feeling that something isn't right, and turn back to look into the pitch black dining room. I stare into the blackness, focusing my eyes, and in the black I can make out a sort of outline right at the back of the room, like I could see something, but couldn't at the same time. A black figure in a black space. It wasn't moving, and there weren't any sounds, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in there, and that it was looking right at me. I was too scared to turn on the dining room light or get any closer to the possible figure in the shadows. So, in a frozen state of panic, I took my phone out of my pocket, planning to keep my distance, turn on the flashlight, and shine it into the room. As my thumb ran over the screen, I saw that I had a message. It was from my wife, sent 10 minutes ago. "Hey, busy night. I won't be home for a couple of hours. Don't wait up." I looked at the still motionless figure in the darkness. The outline was clearer now, and I realized it was because it had gotten closer. This wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. Someone really was there, and whoever it wasn't my wife. I turned on the flashlight and shone it directly into the dining room. There was someone standing there. It was a man. The light illuminated him, and he lifted one of his hands to shield his eyes. The light glinted off the blade in his other hand. I realized he was in mid-step and moving towards me. I almost dropped my phone out of fear, but instead managed to make a beeline for the back door. I ran outside and got a safe distance from the house. Not hearing any footsteps behind, I turned back to look. The man was standing on the perimeter of my property, staring at me with wide eyes.
Respawn in the overworld and there's a super monster right there next to you,
between myself
and it somehow doesn't notice you?
Calling the authorities.
Alright.
When they finally arrived, they found the man inside my house, still clenching the blade. Turns out, this guy was one of my wife's patients. He had some serious issues, had stopped taking his meds, and was going through an episode when he snuck into our home. He thought it was my wife, home alone that night. When asked what he was planning on doing, he remained silent. I looked on as they took him away. His eyes were still bulging, but otherwise, his face was blank and expressionless. Last I heard, he'd been committed to a psych ward. I hope he gets the help he needs, and I really hope he doesn't try and pay us a visit if he ever gets out. I don't know exactly what his plan was that night, but I know it involved my wife, and you can best believe we don't keep our door unlocked anymore. I'm just thankful that it really wasn't my wife home alone that night. Who knows what might have happened. This was maybe 20 years ago, in Manila, Philippines. There was a dead body on the side of the street, with a sign around its neck, saying, "I'm a cell phone thief. Don't be like me." I was 17, coming home from my girlfriend's house at around 3 or 4 in the AM. I live in an apartment and would regularly jump my backyard fence, climb up the second floor, and come down the stairs to climb through my window on the first floor. Didn't want to wake the parents. I get to the fence, hear a car screeching its tires. I get to the top of the fence, and as I turn back to land, I hear footsteps running towards where I am. I'm caught off guard, because no one should be back there at that time. I land and turn around to see who it is. It's a neighbor who lives in the building, a 32-year-old gangster cholo and frequent substance user. I felt relief because we were on decent terms, and he knew who I was growing up. But then I notice the Uzi in his hand. He half points it at me, shaking as he does so. I nearly crap myself, but he lowers it, realizing who I am. I say, "Hey, what's up?" He was obviously on something. I could tell by the way he was talking. He asked me to hold his gun so he could go and take a piss, pushing it into my chest as he did so. I could feel him shaking from adrenaline, or whatever he was wired on. I look at it, and it's just cold, hard steel in the shape of a gun. It looked like death. I felt like I didn't have a choice. I was stuck for a second, but I managed to take a step back, raise my hands, and say, "Nah, bro, I can't." He says it's all good. Use your shirt to hold it just real quick while I take a piss. I repeat, "Nah, I can't. Put it on the floor and do what you gotta do. I'll keep watch." He proceeds to take a leak, turning my way every other second because his loaded gun is on the floor between us. I look the other way, trying not to make him any more nervous. I look into the sky and hear a helicopter approaching. It's low, and its searchlight is scanning the area. I tell him, "Yo, I gotta go." He asks if I have keys to the backyard door. I nervously pull them out and say, yeah, I do. But let's go though. I hurriedly run to the door and open it for us. He lives on the first floor as well, and we go our opposite ways. A huge relief. I have to jump through my window still. I can barely manage to get the screen off because I'm shaking so much. 10 seconds later, I'm in, and nervous from what's just happened. I wash my face, change my clothes, get ready for bed. I put Adult Swim on to try and relax and drift off to sleep. 20 minutes later, as I'm drifting off, I see a red laser being pointed through my curtains. I nearly shat myself, as my bed was visible through the curtains, and the dot seemed like it was shaky and searching. My only thought was that my neighbor had gone and got more high, thought about what had happened, and decided I'd seen too much. I'm literally hugging my wall, standing on my bed to avoid the laser beam. I thought I was dead. Then the red light shuts off and flicks on and off a couple of times, and I notice the angle isn't floor level. It's coming from the second floor. A neighbor girl I used to talk to had 2 younger sisters, and their window was across from mine, but on the second floor. Most likely, they saw me jumping in through the window and decided it was a good idea that night to shine a laser beam into my room. I was furious and sent her sister a few texts, blowing up about them shining the laser into my room that late at night. She understood without me having to explain, and they stopped immediately. But damn, the thoughts that were running through my head. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry about the situation.
That's such a dick move, meeting a dude with a gun,
This
take a
next story is
piss,
narrated
and then
by
your
my friend,
fucking
Sound
neighbors
Fiction.
sniper
He's new on YouTube
sniper
and an
prank
excellent
you.
storyteller.
That's so mean.
So make sure to check out his channel via the link in the description box after this video.
I used to work night shifts at a convenience store that stayed open until 3 a.m. The place was in the middle of nowhere, which was great for me because after 11 p.m. there were rarely any customers. Even before 11, things were usually quiet. Some shifts went by without a single person stepping foot inside the store. That basically meant I could treat work like paid personal time. I'd often play music and zone out behind the counter, or finish up some college assignments that were due. I only worked there twice a week, so staying up into the early hours wasn't a big deal. Most college students stay up half the night on weekends anyway, right? The store had 2 security cameras on the ceiling, one positioned behind the counter, which basically covered half the store, and a camera at the back that covered the other half. We could keep an eye on things from the back office, where the monitor was located. Well, one night, I was working the night shift alone, as per usual. It was just after 3 in the morning, closing time. I was counting some money in the back office when I got this weird feeling that something was off, and I looked up toward the CCTV monitor. There was a man standing in the middle of the store. Big guy by the looks of it. Very tall, but otherwise normal looking. Strange thing was, he was staring directly into the overhead camera, and he wasn't moving an inch, like a stiff piece of cardboard. Not looking around or approaching the counter or anything. Strangely, I hadn't heard the bell at the entrance go off either. It automatically chimed whenever anyone comes into the store. Thinking I must have just not heard it, I walked out to tell the guy we were closed. But when I got to the counter, there was nobody there. Only one door separates the back office from the store. So it's not like he could have run anywhere in the few seconds it took for me to move between rooms. I went to check the store entrance, which I'd already locked. Yep, still locked. Nobody outside either. I went back into the office to make sure the camera was working properly. Sure enough, the feed was live and operating normally. I figured it must have been a glitch. Some old footage probably got cut into the feed somehow. I'm no technical whiz kid, so I thought that explained it. Then I got back to counting the money. Maybe a minute passed. when my eyes were again drawn to something on the monitor. My heart nearly sank into my stomach when I saw the same tall man on the screen, now standing at the back of the store, pressed up against the fridge, arms at his sides, his back turned to the camera. I grabbed one of the metal poles we used to unhook ceiling latches and opened the door to the main store. "Hello?" I shouted out. "I'm sorry, but we're closed." No reply. I looked up and down each aisle in turn, but saw nobody. The man was nowhere to be found, and with the entrance locked, there was nowhere for him to have gone. I bolted back into the safety of the office. As soon as I'd locked the door behind me, I looked at the monitor, and there he was, pressed up close against the office door that I just ran through, staring through the small window. My eyes darted to that window in the door, and there was nobody there, no face or anything. But there he was on the live footage, clear as day. I grabbed my bag and scrambled out the back door of the office that led into the parking lot. After locking the back door, I got into my car and drove a few minutes before pulling over. I toyed with the idea of calling the cops, but instead called up my boss to tell him someone was in the store, knowing he'd be annoyed that I woke him up, but not knowing what else to do. He was sort of a big brother figure to me, a mentor, the kind of guy who had a tough start in life and wasn't afraid of anything. I at least knew he'd help me out. My boss groggily answered his phone, and I told him the situation. He asked me what the guy looked like, and I described him as best as I could.
I know the guy you're talking about. And yeah, he scares me too.
My boss came down to the store about a half hour later, and we went back in together to finish counting the money and to take a look around. We checked the video from that night, but there was no trace of the man in the footage. My boss didn't call me crazy or get angry at me for wasting his time, though. He seemed to understand completely.
Thought I was the only one who saw him.
He said to me.
But if I told you before, would you have believed me?
According to my boss, he'd seen a large man on the monitor about 3 times over 2 years, who vanished whenever he went to look at him in person. He just said I got unlucky that shift. I want to chalk this experience up to me hallucinating, or my mind playing tricks on me in the early hours. But the fact my boss said he'd seen the same figure, well, either he was screwing with me and swapped out the footage, or there really was something unexplainable going on in the store. Thing is, my boss wasn't one for screwing around. From then on, we always had at least 2 people working the night shifts. But I didn't stay working there for long after that.
This happened a few years ago, a couple of weeks before Christmas. My husband works for a finance company, and every year they throw a big Christmas party for all of the employees. Hubby isn't one for large social gatherings, but he felt obliged to turn up and stay for the whole event. That meant he wouldn't get home until after midnight. I honestly quite looked forward to those annual nights at home by myself. That night, just like all the years before, I ordered some takeout and binge-watched my favourite TV shows. Come 10 PM, I was already half asleep, and my husband had told me not to wait up for him, so I threw on my PJs, got into bed, and quickly fell asleep. I don't know what time it was, but I was awoken by my husband kissing me on the cheek, and then running his hands affectionately down my body. I was too tired to open my eyes, or even speak, so I just let out a groan to acknowledge his presence. As he kissed me, I noticed the unmistakable smell of whiskey on his breath. It was rare for him to drink, but it was Christmas after all. I heard him leave the bedroom and head back downstairs, then heard him rummaging around, probably making a nighttime snack or getting some work things organized. I didn't think much of it and fell back into a deep sleep. I was again awoken by my husband finally getting into bed and snuggling up beside me. The next morning when I woke up, I turned to my husband and asked him what time he got home. He said around 1:30 a.m. I then asked him how many drinks he had had. He replied, none. I laughed and called him a liar, said I smelled the whiskey on his breath last night when he came home. He said he'd maybe brought the smell of the party back on his clothes or something. I told him no, it was definitely on his breath when he kissed me. He said he hadn't kissed me. We checked downstairs. There was food missing from our fridge that neither I nor my husband had eaten, as well as a used plate on the table. Nothing of value had been taken, but a framed photo of me was missing from the living room. Police said there was no sign of a break-in. We have no idea how whoever this was got in the first place, but someone other than my husband had gotten inside during that small window of time I was alone and sleeping, and my husband was still out. How he knew to come at exactly that moment, I have no idea. We went to stay with my family until we found another place to move to. The blue ring octopus has a venom that causes paralysis, causing people to die of cardiac arrest or because of hypoxia. There's no antidote. The only cure is CPR, or life support, for the hour or so it takes for the venom to leave your body. There was a man who was bitten by a blue ring octopus. As the lifeguard was performing CPR, he was lying on his back on the beach, facing the sky, eyes frozen open. Unable to close his eyes or communicate with the others, he lied there as the sun slowly burnt out his retinas. He became permanently blind. I went onto the Verrückt water slide at the Schlorpin. If that sounds familiar, it was the tallest water slide in 2014, and was also the same water slide that a young boy died from decapitation. I went on this ride a month before the boy died. So the ride had a narrow raft that had 3 seats in a single row. I remember sitting at the back of the raft and looking for a seatbelt or safety harness, only to find out the only thing strapping you in was a Velcro strap that went over one shoulder. That was it. And as soon as it went down the first drop, the Velcro strap instantly came undone, and I started to feel myself lift out of my seat. It felt as if time moved slowly as I grabbed onto these loose, cheap nylon straps that were supposed to pass as handles, but they were so loose I ended up gripping onto the inner material of the raft as hard as I could, and agonized over the fact I had to go through another drop. The ride itself was less than a minute long, but it felt so much longer. Once we reached the bottom of the slide, I sat there, momentarily stunned about what had just happened, and the rest of my family that were waiting at the end of the slide came up to me and were shocked when they saw me still sitting in the raft, trembling, with tears streaming down my face. When I told my family what had happened, they informed the lifeguard that was monitoring at the bottom of the slide, and they said they would report and inspect the raft I'd been riding on. I was in shock the rest of the time we were at the water park, and didn't go on any of the other rides. I told as many people as I could about the lax safety precautions that the ride had. And then, a month later, I saw the incident with the death of the boy on the same ride, and instantly got chills. It sunk in that I really could have died the same way that poor boy did if I wouldn't have had a death grip on the sides of that raft. My mum always told us her dead twin sister follows her. Her sister died at a young age. I always called bull, because what's she wearing? How did she follow you from the Caribbean where she died? One day at work, my mum came to drop off my lunch that I forgot. After she dropped it off, she went to say hello to the guy playing music at the back. A customer she walked past stopped, turned, and went to kiss his knees and did the Holy Cross. I asked him if he's okay, and he stared at my mum and said, "A woman is following that lady over there." My stomach crunched because it was too random.
Alright, let's have a little bit of a less weird one. There's a channel that I like that goes by Wendigoon, who is a very funny man. We're gonna do some of his stuff now. Less ominous, just more interesting stuff, I think. So how about we do his mystery flesh pit video, which is an hour long. That sounds like fun, right?
So, as you probably know at this point, I, for one, love horror. And one of the things that's so important for me in a horror setting is that of the setting itself. Most often, horror like Friday the 13th or the Halloween series takes a setting we're all familiar with, and that's used as the basis for whatever the scare is. And then several of my favorite horrors, like the 1982 movie The Thing, take a setting that we can sort of relate to, like people at a research base, and then use that for whatever cosmic horror comes out of it. But I think it's especially interesting whenever a horror series creates an entirely unique world that is so visceral and outside of our realm of understanding that just the thought of it in itself is enough to creep us out. And today I want to bring one of those horrors to you, Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. Now, this was originally started by an artist known as Trevor Roberts, who goes by Strange Vehicles on Reddit. And specifically, it began within the subreddit r/world building. It began as a sort of creative exercise of seeing how intricate or heavily put together of a world you could make. However, as you could see, Trevor went way beyond the average or what was required of him, and instead created this super expansive universe. That being of a now defunct national park that was made out of a living cave that is potentially a giant hundreds and hundreds mile long creature underneath the earth itself. Not only that, but Trevor was able to tell this story through a series of brochures and park guides that look like they would be standard of any national park. So there's not only creativity with the world itself, but also the manner in which information is given to us. So today I want to go through some of the details and break down this entire ARG that Trevor has crafted. However, there's no way that I'm going to be able to get to every single minute detail, as cool as they all are. So I'm going to leave a link to the original website where all of this information is cataloged for you to find, as well as the artist's Patreon and subreddit, because I'm telling you, this is some wild stuff and you really need to check it out. And you know what else you should check out? Today's sponsor that allows you to save money while shopping for free. Because if you're like me, nowadays online shopping is pretty much all that you ask that you please use my link, because it lets them know that I sent you, and it helps me and it helps the channel, and I really appreciate it. So thank you all so much for watching. Thank you so much to Honey for sponsoring the video. It means the most. I hope that you check it out. I hope you use the link in the description. I hope you all have a great day, and we are back to the video, which is again 2 feet this way. Just cut back. So without further ado, we are going to go ahead and break down the horror of the Flesh Pit. But first of all, and as always, thank you for watching. So the story of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park is told very non-chronologically. Basically, Trevor will release these incremental posters and pictures that allow us to paint a picture of the world together. So lucky for you all, I already did all that and believe I can track down what the first references to the park, or at least, you know, on a timeline, what the first references to the park can be. We'll break down more of the actual details of what the pit is like, as well as the quite literal anatomy of it later. But right now, we're just getting an introduction to how this thing came to be. In our first letter from James Jackson, also known as Jim Jackson, which we'll see more of later, he writes in a letter to Mr. Colton Fleming explaining the finding of this cave itself. The letter reads, "Dear Colton, now you know more than most how I may be prone to hyperbole on occasion, but those Whitmer boys that called on Monday are on to something amazing. I mean really truly amazing. This isn't any mineral deposit, Colton. At least not like anything I've seen. I went ahead and sent some samples for you and Chris to start looking at. I didn't think you all would believe me if I didn't. This thing that those old boys found is some kind of organic deposit that must go down at least 500 or 600 feet by my reckoning. Not a fungus either. This thing breathes and makes sounds same as any other creature, and it bleeds. God, how it bleeds. Colton, it's a mess out here. John and some of the others think it might be something from outer space. Most of the hombres we brought out to start the excavation call it Diablo Debajo, and are real weary of going too close to what we figure must be the mouth of this thing. Right now, I don't think I care what it is or where it came from. I'm an oil man, and I think we're onto something real big out here. Once you and Chris start looking at these samples, go ahead and give Lenny a call to send out his crew, and make sure they bring at least 4 excavators. Pay them whatever they ask to make it fast. Also, there's a card in here for a fella in Carlsbad with some pretty heavy duty spelunking gear. Pay him whatever he wants to get here by Friday or Saturday. I'll call Beverly to have her put out other jobs on hold for the next 3 weeks, but you should remind her anyway. We need to move real fast on this. Dale Whitmer already left this morning to find someone in gumption to come take some photos. It'll be a circus once that happens. God help us if the feds come out and lock it down. There's something about this thing that's important, and I don't want to see something this special get in the hands of some game warden. Regards, James Jackson of Jackson Surveying Incorporated. So as you can see there, it seems that just a normal mining operation or oil drilling operation came across this giant creature hidden underground. Now Jackson was right as to say that this thing underground, whatever they walked into, was actually the mouth of it. Because as we're going to see in a little bit, this thing has entire nervous systems, muscles, and stomach components, and it seems that this agape opening is in fact the mouth of this creature. Now before we get into a lot of the details, or my favorite part, the tourism surrounding the flesh pit, I need to go ahead and read the second letter from Jackson as to make sense of this. Dear Colton, things are really starting to take off down here. At around 3 or so last night, we broke a new depth record of 1,800 feet vertical descent from the maw. It's a damn shame you and the other folks are so spooked by this pit. To be down there in it really is something else. Now don't misunderstand, I'm not saying it's easy. God almighty, is it tough getting around down in its gullet and such. A man's gotta have an iron constitution or a mighty thick skull, and lucky me, the good Lord has seen fit to bless me with both. Some of the boys here have rigged up scuba gear, and we've been able to squeeze around down there with some effort. Giant muscles, giant bones, innards so big you could drive a trailer truck through. Strange critters scuttling around in the dark down there too. Big bugs and germs and worms and other queer things that you wouldn't believe. Some kind of crab thing the size of coyote crept out a week and a half ago, and we caught it crawling around the feed trailer. I got a good look at it before one of Dale's boys shot at it, and it skittered away. We had the funeral for the third roustabout to pass away this month on Tuesday. The papers are already talking gossip more than I like, and I'm hopeful that Bill and the other attorneys can keep the vultures and the feds at bay. People don't understand until they've seen it and been down inside it, Colton. We're pioneers and explorers here. This is good work. This is God's work. Nobody knows what this mystery pit is or what it eats, or how long it's been here. We need some guys with real smarts, not oil men. Doctors, scientists, and good decent folk who would have nothing to do with us. I'm mighty glad that you've taken responsibility for holding down the fort back home while I'm out here playing the cowboy. You're a good man, Colton, the kind of quality individual they don't make anymore. Maybe I'm hoping I can find some of that goodness myself someday, maybe down in the belly of this beast. Give Samantha and the baby my regards. Jim Jackson. P.S. There's a company out of Fort Worth that I've called up to help with the exploration. I attached their card to this letter. Give their geologist a call and let them know the details. I'm told they're very good at what they do. And attached we see a business card for the Anodyne Deep Earth Mining Company. Now Anodyne's going to come up a lot because they're pretty much responsible for everything that happens after this point. So the pit was discovered in 1973. And as Jackson talked about in the letters, very quickly the local populace as well as the authorities began to grow interest in it because
Duh.
And one of the most interesting things about this story is the immediate rush of consumerism that happens surrounding the pit. See, initially it becomes a competition of what certain groups are going to do with it, but through what you can kind of pick up on as some government influence on Anodyne's behalf, they managed to get the park sanctified as a national park. What that means is that the park itself is treated in the same way the Smokies or Yellowstone would be treated, as in it cannot be destroyed by any newcomers coming in. However, it can be hosted by different companies like restaurants or lounges, and more importantly, Anodyne maintains access to the resources. So the main questions going in at this point is how big is the pit and what exactly did they do to it? And measurements of tissue as far down as they could see initially are about 30 kilometers, which again probably isn't even close to how deep it actually is. And charts like this one that have the original surveyor's mark show that they mapped it out down to about 4,000 feet. So in other words, it's pretty big. And if you'll pay attention to that part in the second letter, people are not the only creatures alive inside of the living cave itself. As a matter of fact, as you can see on the major parasitic fauna chart, there are several massive creatures that people have to worry about. Like for example, the abyssal sopapod. That's probably not how it's pronounced, but whatever.
Sopapod.
When I initially saw this, I was like, oh, well, what is that? Like a really big beetle like that? And then I was reading in another entry about how they eat people and can grow up to 20 feet long. So in other words, a small school bus that eats people.
Oh my gosh.
Which would mean all these other creatures you can see there are probably much, much bigger than people are. Also beneath several of these posts is a sort of explanation that goes into more detail around whatever's being discussed. So underneath the bug chart, we can see in the description that it reads, "This chart and many others like it were produced by Park Service as an educational tool for use in classrooms, museums, and universities. Popular among natural history enthusiasts, the illustrations featured on these posters were the result of an intensive expeditions and surveys into the mystery flesh pit. While visitors are almost certain to encounter common fauna, such as the myriad of macrobacteria subspecies, many organisms such as the Venice shamble and the abyssal sopapod, probably pronouncing that wrong again, tend to evade trails and high traffic areas, making them difficult to spot. As a practical tool, these illustrations were useful in training wildlife management rangers in proper firearm techniques for safely dispatching a dangerous organism. For this reason, the designers of this and other charts attempted to represent the scale of the organisms in relation to each other as accurately as possible." So if you're going into the pit, you better be strapped. And also, like, look at all the detail in these different designs. Like for example, the lesser sopapod, which looks like a giant tendril shrimp thing, and then the gastric bristleworm, which is huge and terrifying. And there's some more specific entries about some of the lesser known or lesser seen ones. Like for example here with the evolution of the amorphous Shane pamphlet, which is presented as a sort of brochure for people taking a hike through the trail, you can see the life cycle of something that is believed to be an ancient descendant from a weasel that over time crawled into the cave and slowly lost so many traits of itself, it eventually just became a blob of organs that crawls inside of crevices in the flesh walls of the cave itself and just like absorbs the nutrients, which is And as you'll remember me mentioning earlier, the flesh pit itself became a national park, hiking and all, which means, as pictured on maps like this that show the orifice or mouth of the pit, as well as an interior trail map, people would go on these very long excursions walking through the innards of this creature. And people could visit such amazing sights such as the northern bronchial forest, which is the sort of lungs of this creature, the amniotic thermal springs, which is something we are going to talk about in a minute, the gastric sea, which is digestive enzymes, or the fondue village, which is bone marrow so large you can walk inside of it, which is a very comforting thought. And some of the dangers that hikers through the park, and I'm going to continue using park, but by park I mean giant flesh underground monster thing, we can see in the wildlife safety pamphlet some of the things people hiking would have to worry about. Like with the introduction, it says your visit to the Mystery Flesh Pit can be a most pleasurable and rewarding experience, or it can be a time of vexation, distress, or even tragedy. Much depends on how you and your family observe these simple guidelines and avoid designated hazards. Take a minute to read these simple but important safety rules, then go on to a pleasant park experience. I also want to mention all of these pamphlets, as well as everything that I'm going to mention that's been industrialized within the park, has been done by the Anodyne Corporation. Visitors and wildlife within the Mystery Flesh Pit often frequent the same areas within the park. It is likely that park wildlife and visitors will encounter one another, but by remaining calm and following the basic advice of experienced veterinobiologists, you increase the odds of a positive outcome for both yourself and the wildlife. All visitors who partake on self-guided excursions beyond reinforced and enclosed trails within the Mystery Flesh Pit are required to attend an orientation at the lower visitor center. During this orientation, a park ranger will inform you about areas that are close to visitors due to high fauna activity or recent wildlife-human encounters. It is important to be aware when camping and hiking within the Mystery Flesh Pit to avoid wildlife foraging areas, chimal deposits, gastric bladders, surface wildlife carcass mounds, etc. So not only do you have to worry about the giant bug things that are essentially this creature's immune.
Can I get an F in the chat? Just an F from everybody. We found the F unknown, chat. Look at him. He's a silly little lad, isn't he? Just kind of chilling out there. Big old F.
System, but you have to worry about the creature itself digesting you. We'll talk about that in a minute, but a final thought on encountering these things. It says at the end of the pamphlet, if you see flora or fauna within the park and it does not appear to notice you, back out of sight and change your course. Move out of the area or quietly observe at a safe distance without approaching or otherwise disturbing it. Disturbance is evident whenever wildlife change their behavior because of you. If it stops eating and looks up / raises its antennas or secretes scent enzymes or begins making territorial clicks while trying to locate you, you are too close. While many life forms within the pit seem to be tolerant of human presence at a distance further than 200 yards, each creature is different. Use telephoto lenses and endoscopes where possible. Allow migrating bacterial colonies to pass by your camp undisturbed. If you have made sure that the wildlife is aware of your presence so it is not surprised and have kept all your gear under your direct control, allow any organism you encounter to travel unhindered. You may just be afforded the opportunity to safely observe these amazing creatures in their natural environment. Yeah, these giant 20-foot tall shrimp things that eat people, just don't panic and just let them walk by your camp. Which I guess, like, their resistance to gunshots is mentioned earlier, but I guess that's all you can do. Also, not only mentioned here, but in other places, it seems all the creatures within the pit itself is blind, which makes sense because before we opened up the hole into the mouth of this thing, it was entirely underground, and everywhere throughout the pit is just pitch black. So none of these creatures use eyesight, it's all sound and pheromone tracing. So remember how just a second ago I said that the pit or park itself can eat you? They know that can happen because it's happened. On one of the deeper trails through the park itself, you can come across something known as the circus clown chimus. The description of it reads as though it may look like a colorful ice cream birthday cake covered in a glazed frosting, this calcified formation is anything but festive. In 1976, a group of performers accidentally fell into the upper maw of the entry orifice. While the soft flesh of the pit throat somewhat cushioned the performer's fall, the unexpected dilation of an epiglottal fold allowed them to slide down into a then unreinforced area of the pit. Rescue personnel were able to locate the performers inside a digestive sac a few hours later. By that time, all 50 stunts people had already begun being digested by the pit. Rescue personnel cut them out, correctly guessing that many were still alive. An experimental antacid spray was discharged on top of the gooey, shrieking mound, but it was too late. Instead of reducing the acidic effects of the partially digested bodies of the performers, the experimental compound flash calcified into the multicolored formation that you see in front of you. Though hauntingly beautiful, the circus clown chimus is a somber reminder of why it is always important to observe all safety instructions and to always stay on the marked trails while visiting the interior of the mystery flesh pit. So, a group of clowns were performing above the flesh pit itself because people are going to be stupid, and then 50 of them fell into the pit, couldn't be located for hours, and when they did locate them, they were trapped inside of a digestive enzyme sac, like a giant lysosome. And then when they cut them out, they were all melted together and screaming and shrieking, and then froze like that. And they just left it there. And then they had the audacity to call it hauntingly beautiful, which no, it's not, it's just haunting. But despite all of this, people still visit the park. And while reading this, at the first moment, I'm like, that's dumb, they wouldn't. And then I thought for 3 seconds, and I'm like, yeah, they probably would. So once Anodyne had the initial park opened up, or at least the central part of it, that's when the advertising began. Such as this poster for the park itself, which says, discover verdant forest, majestic scenery, and cosmic terror. Enjoy legendary trout fishing, geotonic carnal moans, broken philosophy, backcountry hiking, and camping. I love the broken philosophy because, yeah, where's your god now? A lot of the supplemental material you can read on your own is about how it was hard for businesses to at first sell the idea of the flesh pit because, you know, people were reasonably afraid. So one of the things they did was they came up with this mascot called Caver Coop, who would do these animated sort of Looney Tunes style films talking about going through the cave and why it's really not something to be afraid of in a sort of propaganda technique. And they would have several events, and some catered towards children, like Caver Coop's Spooky Halloween Carnival, where among the activities for children to perform is haunted hay rides, campfire stories, safe trick-or-treating, and blood. Because if there's one thing this giant cave has a lot of,
It's blood.
it's interesting with these, a lot of the brutality that occurs behind the scenes, just for all of the happy sort of national park vibes that are put on the display. Like for example, in one letter called Experiences of a Flesh Pit Mine Worker, a mine worker writes to a child telling them what it's like to work for Anodyne in the flesh pit, where essentially a full crew of people work outside of this giant mining rig that works as a boring machine cutting through the cave. And by cutting through, I don't mean in the way that like other things dig through rock. I mean quite literally, it's hacking and slashing and there's blood everywhere and it's insane. In describing to the boy how the rig works, he says ideally the rig cuts as it goes, leaving a burnt cauterized path through the meat while also crushing and processing any minerals it runs through. In the real world, the pit isn't uniform, and you end up running into all kinds of obstacles requiring interventional solutions, or the brass up top decide that they don't want you just cutting through certain parts of the anatomy. So you suit up and get out ahead of the rig to poke and prod and pry at a walking pace. 8 hours a day for weeks at a time. Rigs have a big hydraulic arms that reach forward and push, lift, and splay open organs or muscle bundles before us roustabouts would go in and suck up or hose out any blood, cut tendons, cauterized tissue, rinse, and repeat. So while you're thinking that whatever's going on may harm this creature, This thing is so big, it's the equivalent of having like a zit, basically. Everything that these people are doing. And as you can see from diagrams like this with the park trail engineer, some of the places inside of the pit are so tight or so inhospitable because you're in a giant immune system, basically, that you have to wear these full body suits and put these stents up everywhere that you go so that the muscles don't collapse in and crush you to death. And vehicles like the Park Ranger utility vehicle shows you what you need in order to traverse through this myriad of guts. I also like a lot of these smaller touches that he puts into the world building, like for example, this necklace that was taken off of a mine worker that says, "A flesh pick worker's prayer. Each day I descend into the deep, cutting meat to earn my keep. Pray to my Father in heaven above that I return to those I love. If somehow death and I should meet, as even the flesh pit needs to eat, I want my loved ones to be sure that in Jesus' arms I am secure." And it's an interesting way to combine these West Texas vibes, of which the pit itself takes place in, with this horrific cosmic Lovecraftian horror that the authors built. And it is dangerous. You can see in several of the different designs that are posted on here, trail engineers, surveyors, and commercial mine technicians, all these need these massive spacesuits. And there's even special weapons shown, like the Anatomical Environment Multi-Tool, or AEM, which was made to shoot spikes into walls in order to hoist the walls of the cave so you can walk through it, but they later realized was really good at taking out these giant lobster things that attack the workers. So you may be asking, all these workers, all these miners, like, understandably it's a park, but what are they looking for? And the answer is all sorts of stuff. Like using chemicals and enzymes found within the cave, Anodyne became this multi-conglomerate corporation that made things from laundry cleaner over to powerful computers that use the nerve fibers of the cave walls as a means of processing information, and things like Coke Heartthrob, which is a special flavor of Coke that has some very special abilities. As the description reads on that, it says Coke Heartthrob was first introduced on Valentine's Day in 1985 as a limited promotion, but sold so well over the summer that Coca-Cola added it to their primary beverage roster in 1986. The defining ingredient in Coke Heartthrob was, of course, amniotic ballast, harvested from special glands deep within the mystery flesh pit. The potent aphrodisiacal properties of amniotic ballast were diminished by heavily diluting the chemical before adding it to the beverage, but Coke Heartthrob still developed a notorious reputation for its unusual intoxicating effects. So remember earlier how I said there's the amniotic pools that we're going to mention later? This is the part where I mentioned them. So hidden deep within the cave, they found something that they believe is a part of the creature's endocrine system, known as the amniotic thermal springs. And it turns out these things have insane healing properties. We see images of how this is used as a treatment for Alzheimer's or better aging in the elderly, as well as being used for cancer treatment and all sorts of different illnesses. There are several spas in and around the pit that use this amniotic ballast as a source of physical healing. On the Mystery Below Journey pamphlet, among all the different lounging and dining options we see, like the Marriott Hotel that they have, or the Hard Rock Cafe located just outside of the pit, and even things like an IMAX theater, we can see the advertisement for the amniotic thermal springs. It says on there, located on the ground floor of the visitor center, by the vending machines are the amniotic baths. So this is above surface before you go into the pit. Amniotic secretions are pumped from glands deep within the pit for visitors who are unable to descend into the pit. These springs are known to have a range of positive effects on human psychology, physiology, and well-being, and are enjoyed both medicinally and recreationally. Note, as the visitor center is a family-friendly facility, the surface spring baths are diluted to a 1:20 potency ratio with filtered water. For higher concentrations within adult-only baths, park guests are encouraged to visit the pleasure domes located east of the lower visitor center complex within the mystery flesh pit. Okay, so these amniotic things are used as aphrodisiacs in Coke, and it says here that they are heavily diluted in the park itself because it's a family-friendly atmosphere. Or I should say within the hotel itself. In the park, they're not diluted at all. For those that don't know, an aphrodisiac is something that gets you in the mood. And if you were curious how effective of an aphrodisiac this stuff is, in the chart that shows us details of the amniotic thermal springs itself, we can see a spring potency chart. Now, essentially, remember this is a giant creature. The thermal springs are these glands that you can walk through the canals of and bathe inside of these giant hot tubs, essentially made out of enzymes, and all the different nodes of this gland act as different bathhouses. On the chart for the spring potency, you can see that there is a green line, and for the green line it says visitors are encouraged to consult a physician before entering baths below the green line, because it can have different effects on your well-being. And then the yellow line on the super potent baths, the most potent of which being the libido bath, it says visitors are encouraged to consult a religious, mystic, or sexual wellness counselor before entering baths below the yellow line, because the more potent this stuff is, the more in the mood you get. It says that outside of the main bath, which remember is very, very diluted, users have to be 18 years old to go into the main baths. Also, because you can't bring any clothing in there, you have to be naked, because of course you do. It even says on this chart, a secondary and infamous property of amniotic spring fluid are the psychoactive and aphrodisiacal effects it has on those who consume or topically apply it. Bathers describe a gentle euphoric sensation when soaking in higher potency springs, with the effects of concentrated exposure being well documented by several best-selling short films, many of which are available for purchase by request in the Upper Visitor Center gift shop. Beyond the physical sensations, visitors often claim that they develop deep emotional bonds with those they interact with while inside the thermal springs. So you go inside the nodes of this giant monster thing underground and fall in love, which is a story as old as time. Also, looking at this chart, I just noticed a bottle of water is $13 down here. Oh my gosh, that is price gouging. That's the real horror of this whole thing. These horrible amusement park level gouging, my word. Anyway, also looking at this node chart, there is a small sort of squishy node that comes off to the side, and it says undeveloped ballast bulb. Visitors are encouraged to experience the traditional bathing process by crawling into the bulb orifice. No thank you. And then over to the side we can see pumps that work as a way of pumping this amniotic fluid to the surface. What's interesting is reading the final paragraph of this entire chart. It says amniotic spring fluid is safe to eat and drink and has enjoyed limited exposure as an additive to a variety of popular consumer foodstuffs, such as the seasonally available Coca-Cola Heartthrob, Feel Good McFlurry, and even a ballast-based cordial liquor. And if you'll remember what I talked about at the beginning, this is a since shut down national park, and it was shut down over a specific event that happened that we're going to talk about in a minute. Now, several may be curious as to what the actual layout of the park is. As far as the hiking routes go, it says several of the different routes you can go on. For example, the Bowels of the Earth route, it says the basic tour through the Mystery Flesh Pit. It is a 7.85 mile self-guiding stroll through many large and famous features like the Thor's Ribcage, Septum Falls, God's Mistake, and Oyster Shame. Then there's some more adventurous ones you can go on. There's some guided ones by a ranger that you have to go through, where you pretty much have to crawl through these really tight blood vessel things, which also in the description for one of those tours, known as the Swallowed Whole Tour, it says, note, this tour is not recommended to those who suffer from claustrophobia or a fear of being eaten alive, also known as those with common sense. What's also interesting that you can find while looking through this is several of the park signs that are shown. Like, for example, this one that says, notice respiratory mucosal folds are unmarked exercise caution to avoid entrapment, because you can walk into the cilia of one of these things and get absorbed. Now, if you were to be absorbed, what might happen to you? And I assure you now, the answer is not good. See, on the Identifying Wildlife pamphlet earlier, there was one specific creature called compound surface fauna. And the description says, on rare occasions, abyssal whatever that word is, and other park wildlife will venture outside of the pit and will pull surface animals such as deer, livestock, coyotes, and rabbits into the mystery flesh pit. If not eaten by park fauna, these animals may undergo a fascinating phenomenon known as anatomical amalgamation. This process, which is not fully understood by park scientists, results in the creation of a compound organism, which is a hybrid of constituent surface animals. No two of these amalgamations are the same, though the resulting physiology often results in similar conditions such as partial fusing of major body elements and relocation of internal organs to locations on the exterior of the body. Because of the gruesome and seemingly haphazard nature of the combinations, many compound surface fauna do not live beyond a few hours or days from the time they are discovered. Should you encounter a shambling compound surface fauna, please do not feed it or otherwise engage in activity which could prolong its suffering. And then the most terrifying note in red at the bottom, in the extremely unlikely event that you encounter an amalgamation containing one or more human constituent organisms, contact a park ranger immediately via one of the emergency telephones installed along trail routes. And in horrific images like this and descriptions around it, we can see what happened to those people. It says, while HIPAA and similar regulations prevent me from finding out exactly how many people even suffered amalgamation, it's estimated that fewer than half a dozen ever survived the treatment process to recovery. Recovery, though, is a loaded word here. The treatment co-developed by Baylor Medical Center and Anodyne Corporation was highly dependent on the nature of the amalgamation and seems to have been most successful with combined masses containing only human tissue. The procedure for treatment involved removing the brain and as much of the spinal cord as possible from the amalgamation. When possible, extraction of other organs such as eyes, cochlear tissue, tongues, and larynx would later enable the recovered patient a sensory experience much closer to that which they had previously enjoyed, since medical technology is even still unable to replicate the organic sensory quality of human sensory tissues. However, the difficulty and cost of this additional procedure all but ensured that this rarely took place. Once extracted, the brain of the individual patient would be placed in a nutrient cell, and connected to a proprietary interface and life support system developed by Anodyne Company. A rudimentary, computer-based system could be used to communicate with the recovered patient after several months of therapy, and in some cases, individuals were reported able to use vocoders to synthesize speech. It is unknown how many, if any, of these individuals are still living today. So, most likely, through the cilia in the wall that it said do not get stuck into, you get mushed together with a bunch of other stuff that also got stuck in the walls and become these blob creatures that they try to harvest some organs from to keep you kind of alive. I hate it here. But those visitors that still decide to go in through this massive elevator into a central thing called the Lower Visitor Center, located in the essentially throat of this creature. And as you can see from this image, it is a huge multi-level shopping mall with vendors and gift shops and restaurants and everything else you could imagine. In the description for it, it says, your adventure into the wonder and magnificence of the Mystery Flesh Pit National Park begins as your enclosed gondola begins to descend down into the darkness, away from the blistering heat and light of the Permian Basin. Just when the 20-minute twisting and turning ride down into the maw of this immense organism feels like it might never end, an illuminated structure comes into view beneath your feet. Step out of the elevator car and into the well-lit and comfortable lobby of the Lower Visitor Center, your gateway to an unforgettable visit to one of the world's most unique natural wonders. So this thing is so far down there, it takes 20 minutes on an elevator to get to a like 8-story shopping mall. And if you look back at the maps of this entire thing, that is still nothing compared to the full size of this creature. What is interesting is that in several of the supplemental materials, you can find audio like this that shows what noise is played whenever you make it to the visitor center.
Hello, welcome to the Lower Visitor Center. Here, you can start your incredible otherworldly adventures with our child-friendly tours. For the daring thrill seeker, sign up for private expedition orientation classes at the front desk. For other questions, feel free to ask any of our park rangers. Remember, adventure awaits in the underground.
Also inside of these restaurants in the Lower Visitor Center, for a long time it was said that they served meat from the cave wall itself, which is gross. However, in one of the Q&As that the creator did, he said that this is not true. However, people have ate the meat and says it tastes too gamey to serve, but that the giant lobster things taste delicious. And I've also talked at length already about the amniotic springs, also known as the pleasure domes. But another superstructure that you come across, which is actually at the furthest traced or at least mapped out point in the pits, is the Intra-Park Wellness Resort. This is essentially a giant resort or ski lodge type thing that is built onto the walls of what is basically the stomach of this creature, overlooking something called the Greater Gastric Sea, which, remember, everything in the pit's like dark, so you can't see forever. But as far as the people can see, it is an endless sea of bile and stomach juices. And this resort has pretty much everything from beauty shops, convenience shops, a comedy depot, an arcade system, a techno bis, a dance club. It has a dance club because of course it does. This entire thing is a monument to man's arrogance. There's a petting zoo as well where you can pet the declawed lobster creatures. Anyway, and in all the details about the spa treatments and the thermal things you can go to, it talks about the controls you can have for your room yourself, like a humidity control, and also a window cleaning knob, because since you are overlooking a sea of gastric juices in your hotel room, they keep popping up on the window, so you have these giant wipers to clean it off, which, again, disgusting. I should also mention, speaking of humidity, you're inside of a living thing, so anywhere that is not on the main trail where they have constant AC systems running is 98.6 degrees and 100% humidity, so miserable, which is something a lot of the miners talked about having to deal with, the constant heat and pressure being inside of this thing, because you're essentially a foreign pathogen inside of a giant body. So it's absolutely unbearable if you're not in one of the park designated areas. And even then you could still get killed by the lobster creature, so just don't do it. One of the last details of the actual park layout that I want to mention, besides the fact that if you're not thinking about already, everywhere through the park has to be held open with stents so that the muscles or systems don't close back around you, is the emergency telephones that are placed throughout several different points in the park. Like on this poster, you can see that there are these phones placed around that were done by AT&T, and in the description, it describes that 150 miles of cable were laid as a means of getting communications outside of this organism. Also, seasoned hikers and park field staff referred to these as lighthouses, as walking through the dark with your flashlight, you would see these random blue phones while walking along your path. Which, with all of these, I want you to imagine like the flesh and the noises and just the fact you're walking through something's giant body system, and to just be walking through such an alien place and come across a blue telephone box is so cosmically terrifying.
I love it so much.
Another thing to mention is public reaction to the pit itself. And as we can see through several images, the town of Gumption, Texas, that the pit is located in, absolutely loved the tourism and capitalized on it. However, some were not so happy about it. For example, an advertisement that was hung on hotel doors within the pit is an ad for someone called Homer Litfer Butcher, who works as an attorney for people who were injured while in the flesh pit. And as we can see on an April 1981 issue of Sanctify, the magazine of the Southern Baptist Association, it says on the cover, Baptist Convention denounces exploration of mystery flesh pit, calls it a foul tunnel to Lucifer himself, buried by the Almighty, enjoyed by the damned. And then in a very interesting picture, we can see a image of Dante's Inferno comparing the pit itself to the mouth of hell, which is really cool, and I think I agree with the church on this one. There's also 3 Q&As, or at least 3 so far, that Trevor has done to explain people's questions about the entire world of Flesh Pit National Park. And one of the questions that he was asked is, how long could someone live in the flesh pit long term? To which he said, archaeological evidence of prehistoric human activity within the pit has led to conjecture among scientists that long-term habitation within the anatomy of the pit is possible, but unlikely. Without modern technology and tools, any humans living long-term within the entrails of the superorganism would need to adapt to the perpetual darkness, subpar oxygen, constant high humidity heat, and continually changing fleshscape in order to survive. Fleshscape is a fantastic word, oh my gosh. Over hundreds of generations, when combined with poorly understood long-term effects of consuming amniotic ballast fluid, it is entirely possible that humans adapt to this lifestyle would be fundamentally different from modern humans. Or in other words, if people lived long-term down there, they would probably adapt into these amorphous creatures like the other things that are down there, which who's to say some of that stuff down there isn't people, but whatever. A couple things that I can't find exactly where it was mentioned because I've read through so many of these pamphlets and I can't remember where everything was. But while first exploring the pit, they came across armor from around the period of the Spanish Inquisition, which implies that people got there way earlier, or at the very least they were dragged underground by the things that were there. And one of the more interesting things said in one of these Q&As is someone asked the question, are there any Humanos, Apache, or Comanche, the American Indian people native to the surrounding area, folk tales or oral histories concerning the superorganism? To which Trevor answers, there is a fascinating legend from the near Caddo people by the name of Sacred Medicine Water, which I will reproduce here. The favor of the Great Spirit rested on the abundant forest, flowers, songbirds, and small animals of these quiet hills. Then a fierce dragon devastated the land, bringing disease and hunger and hatred and greed on the people. The Indian nations pleaded with the Great Spirit to subdue the dragon into a deep slumber, and the night of all the heavenly forces contrived to bury it under the world, where it shakes the earth even today. Once the Great Spirit had vanquished the dragon, he caused pure water to gush up through the earth from the beast and asked that his favorite place be held neutral ground so all can share in the healing waters. So here we see this dragon mentioned in Native American folklore is the thing that got knocked out and buried underground. Because if you remember, this thing was completely underground until the oil man Jim Jackson found it in 1973. And these healing waters that it mentions the people would drink that came up from the ground after the dragon was put to sleep are quite possibly the amniotic fluids that we have found in the current day have healing properties. So, if this creature was knocked into a deep slumber, then we better hope it never wakes up. Which it definitely did, and that would be the situation that led to the shutdown of the park in the 2007 catastrophe. Now, the incident is hinted at several times in different stories, or images I should say we come across, because everything that's shown, all the brochures, are relics of the now shut down park being put together by this creator online. That is, until we get to the official U.S. Commission on Geobiological Resource and Public Safety, who did a final incident report on what happened to the park. In the executive summary, they say, at 9:41 p.m. Central Standard Time on July the 4th of 2007, the Permian Basin Superorganism Natural Preserve, known colloquially as Mystery Flesh Pit National Park, experienced a catastrophic disaster which resulted in over 750 fatalities and over 1,800 major injuries. In the weeks following the incident, approximately 18,000 individuals from the surrounding communities sought medical and psychological treatment for ailments including breathing problems, chest pains, shortness of breath, nausea, birth defects, hallucinations, depression, anxiety, internal bleeding, sore throat, and headaches as a direct result of contact.
Chat, it's time. You know what? I'm so loaded with these wisps. That it feels only right that I bloat myself up. I'm so loaded with these wisps, chat. Alright, let's head back to Vesa and tell her that we got all of the wisps except one. $107 wisps. Alright. We gotta go through the rewards phase. Ooh, that's good to have. Ooh. Alright. Every last one of the wisps. I really can't thank you enough. Now we can finally seal away that havoc-wreaking bundle of mischief once more. But we'll need to go to the Shrouded Ruins. It's the only place the sealing will work. We should meet there at the same time of day as when we first met. Hope you remember. Crimson Mirelands at night. Just to reset the timer on this. Sleep a whole 24 hours. You know, true fact, chat, I actually have done that before. That's not a joke. I actually have, like, slept. Or I guess remained in bed for that long. I have nocturia, so my bladder is very overactive, so it wakes me up every few hours to go pee. And I hate that. But, I have slept for an excessive amount of time before. First of all, a confession. I may have told you one teeny tiny lie. About the wisps, there are actually 108 of them. I've been holding on to the last one. Could you put it in the odd keystone with the others? But wait, before that, well, what do you think of me? You're a strange one, but cute. Here it goes, the final wisp. After this, the traveler who used that strange magic will finally forgive me, right? Close your eyes for a sec, would you? Yep, Vesa is the last wisp. Disappeared without a trace. Making you gather all those wisps was my last bit of mischief. Thanks for playing along. Please don't forget about me. Don't you forget about me. Sense the presence of a strange Pokémon. Spiritomb! I love Spiritomb. Look at he spin. She spin. Sorry. Come on. Yes! Yes! Oh, well, I guess I'm no longer bloated with spirits. Huh. Ugh. Whoa. Oh boy. Oh. A rather unconventional stream, but that's fine. One last piece? Oh! Bandit, Queen Bandit, thank you for the follow. Arigato ne. Welcome to the temple. Hope you enjoy your stay. Oh, I absolutely love that one though. That's great. Let me get that up on stream too, actually. Well, hold on. Let me do it this way first. Let me also, like, reconfigure where everything is. Have that. There we go. Let me. Oh, it's the wrong one, but I'll show that one on stream just real quick. Uh-oh, hold on. I gotta open the correct image. Open. There we go. There we go. Yeah, I'm very spooky. I'm spooky. I am the dominant spirit of the Spiritomb, thus I appear within it. I really like that. That's really cute. Thank you. That's actually really, really cute. I like that a lot. I'll keep the other one off of Twitter, but is it okay if I post this one to Twitter, though? I really like it. It's cute. Oh, something I wanted to do. Actually, no, yeah, it is. Put that back over there now. There we go. Just less to... Yeah, okay, awesome, thank you. Alright, let me also, once again, reconfigure the stream setup. There we go. That's really good. Let's go back to the village and do one last thing because it feels right to do. She says not to forget about her. I won't. Don't worry, Vessa. I won't forget. I may actually end up using Spiritomb a little bit, maybe. I like Spiritomb. Very cool design. So yeah, that'll conclude tonight's stream, actually. Let me get back to my house and stuff. Now we save. Perfect. Yeah. Close it now. Here we go. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And I know this is a very unconventional stream. I don't really do mic off, but I wanted to do something tonight because I figured I was like, oh, I'll just spend some time. And I figured that doing the Spiritomb gathering would be a pretty... I wanted to do that on stream anyway. So I guess doing it with a no mic kind of vibe to spooky stuff stream would be fun. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you for coming, and Dragon Cat, thank you for the cute art. Let's go find someone to raid. I think I know who we're going to raid, since she is currently live. Sorry I didn't get to finish the Wendigoon mystery flesh pit bit, but that's fine, I think. What is she up to? Oh god, she's streaming Celeste. I know nothing about that one, but it is important. Alright, let's go over to the ending screen, shall we? Get the raid going. We're gonna raid Fina. From one bimbo to another. But you all take care. Thank you for coming tonight. And Pervy Smurgle and Queen Bandit, thank you for the follows. I appreciate it. And Menagerie, thank you for the raid. I hope you all have a good night. Give Fina some love. Our raid phrase will be Spiritomb raid. And we're gonna use my my Gao emote. My Gao. If you don't have that emote, you can either sub or use the channel points to temporarily unlock it. Alternatively, you can use whatever emote you want. But aside from that, take care everyone. I hope to see you next time. I planned on streaming tomorrow. We'll see how my throat is. If it's not tomorrow, maybe Friday. But yeah, take care everyone. Bye bye!